Welcome everyone. Not that there's anyone here at the moment, just talking to myself, but for those who listen on YouTube in the next following days, give you something to listen to before we start, so it's just not silence. Roger's here. I'm pretty sure he's definitely joining us when he's got kids to bed. I think Graham will jump on as well, so it's going to be very, very male today.
Hello, boys and girls.
We could do it getting someone else on to balance it out a bit. It's going to be very white male today, which is interesting considering what we're talking about.
Yeah, it always is, isn't it? White
Yeah,
male.
most of the time. But yeah, it'd be nice if obviously I only saw the show today. I can't remember when you recorded it with Anna now, but it'd be nice to get her on one of the Saturdays as well. Show her the difference of TikTok, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. It might be good.
I do think if you regularly go live on Facebook, I mean, I've got a few friends on my Facebook that quite often go live from their Facebook. It's the same 6 or 7 people that watch every single time.
Yeah, what did you make of my interview?
No, it's good. It's good. I enjoyed it. It's to be fair, it was a shame it was so short. It could have gone on for quite a bit longer.
I don't know. It's about time we did something.
Go on? Did it go on for longer and it was edited down, or was that the entire thing?
Do you know, I can't remember that bit, to be honest.
Because yeah, that was the only thing I'd say. It's only about 25 minutes or so, isn't it? And like just as it was kind of getting started, she was like, "Oh, we're nearly out of time," and it was just like, "Oh."
Well, yeah, but it's good, really, in a way, for that to
Yeah,
happen.
it's a good little bite-sized thing, and there was lots of interesting topics discussed. I mean, it was pretty appropriate for what we're going to be discussing today.
I wonder if Ronnie's going to.
I haven't sent him a link. I've just been trusting him to find it each time, but I could find him a link and share it to him.
Poor lad. Leaving him there, waving in the wind there.
I have just sent him a link anyway, just in case he struggled.
Yeah. I just done a 1 minute audio. Remember that that woman who came up to the when I was doing a TikTok live, and she started saying, you know, "Oh, you vegans, you can't eat, you can't wear leather." You know, she had this.
Yeah, I remember. And then she just started mouthing off.
Yeah, and said that, "Don't you look like you're dying?"
Yeah.
So I thought I'd done the audio, so it's just less than a minute, so it's quite good, the audio, with a bit of a backbeat to it.
All right, right. You putting that on TikTok on here?
Yeah, well, I'm going to do some visuals for it first.
Yeah. Oh, good. That should be fun.
So I'll probably put it, I don't know, it'll probably go up as what they call it, a short first.
Yeah. Yeah, to be fair, I don't really understand that shorts thing on YouTube. I've got a few videos that are shorts, but they weren't made to be shorts. They just fall into the time remit.
Yeah, and they also clip the edges, don't they?
Yeah, well, I noticed on one of the poems that obviously I don't decide. They decide whether it qualifies as a short. But one of the poems I put forward that was classed as a short takes about the last 10 seconds off anyway, so it just seemed pointless.
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
It
I
shouldn't
don't
do that
know.
if it's less than a minute.
Well, yeah, I'm sure it's 57 seconds, but it stops at like 48 or something like that. It doesn't. It just shaves off the very end of the poem.
Oh, that bit doesn't make any sense to me.
No. But no, to be fair, I don't have much success on the shorts. My watch hours and stuff are quite good though. Quite impressed with how they keep churning up. But then again, I suppose I keep putting out videos that are over an hour long.
You have to stick to to the long trousers.
Hi, Ronnie, you all right?
Yeah, fine. Yeah, doing okay.
Good,
just
good.
been asleep for a while because I was doing a stall all day today. So
Hey, Jennifer.
And yeah,
Hi,
to be
Ronnie.
fair, I don't blame you. I had a nap this afternoon as well.
yeah, I've got another one tomorrow as well. So I don't know how long I can stay on this because I'm gonna have to. I've got to be up early in the morning to do that one. So I'll probably only stay till about I don't know, maybe 9,
Yeah,
half 9.
that's fine. I probably won't go much later than 10 anyway, if do at all.
Yeah.
But no, to be fair, we listened to the Tobias thing earlier, and as soon as that finished, I had a headache, so I went and had about an hour and a half nap as well.
Well, after listening to Tobias,
Yes, yeah. And
then
I missed the
sleep.
start of it as well. I only heard about 3/4 of his talk, and it was still enough. I just personally don't. I mean, I do understand because they said at the end that ProVeg sponsored this event, so it makes sense why he was a speaker because he basically paid to speak. But otherwise, you'd think you'd never pick him to go and speak there because all he's doing is basically telling everyone to not be vegan. Or if you're vegan already, stop being vegan as that. Reduce yourself down and tell everyone else to reduce too.
Yeah, it's not good. No, I don't know a lot about ProVeg, to be honest.
That's not a bad thing.
Well, you can just read it as anti-vegan rather than pro-veg, I think.
Yeah, that's probably the best way of looking at it. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, yeah. like so many of them these days, sadly, isn't it? Really.
The thing is, though, I mean, like, really, what we're talking about here is a division of labour. I mean, if they're saying that there's some welfare to be done and there's some vegetarian stuff to be done, there's some reducitarian stuff to be done, they always go, so we want you vegans to do it. And you go, why? We're vegans, right? Leave us to do the veganism, right? But that's not the deal with all of this. It's really kind of weird. I mean, even Seb Alex was saying, well, I'm an abolitionist, but I can see the advantage of welfare. But that doesn't mean that we've got to do it.
Exactly that, yeah.
No, but it comes anyway. I mean, you campaign.
Yeah, it will just literally come, won't it? With each step forward.
They'll put forward welfare to try and, as a means of like, kind of, still gaining like public support from the people that you're getting through to with the vegan campaigning, won't they?
It's the only way they can react to us, really.
Yeah, and Tobias more or less confirmed it as well with the first question where the lady asked him and she was a bit troubled, I think, by his symbiosis thing, which I'm not surprised about because I think everyone should be troubled by his symbiosis idea. But he more or less admitted that unless you've got a single issue campaign, they don't give you the money. That's
do you want to explain that, Andy, the symbiosis?
Yeah.
That's a symbiotic thing.
It's just totally wrong, isn't it? But yeah, it makes sense. You can see why, from their point of view, why it does it. But it's just, there's never going to change then. It's always going to be more of the same all the time. They control, basically, what campaigning happens. Yeah,
so they're basically saying that because he seems to have some kind of like little small holding now, it looks like. And they're saying that those chickens and pigs have... probably a great life, much better than a free living being, right? Yeah. And so therefore, why can't you have this symbiotic relationship where, you can, well, it had a big list of things that maybe we can take from them, like manure, they can be used for grazing the grass, they can be used for the eggs, they can be used for the wool, and this kind of stuff. And so basically it's just animal use really, but in a very kind of free range kind of, almost kind of, kind of rescue center type setting. The point is, how long can you keep that going anyway?
You can't feed. You wouldn't be able to feed the world on it. To be, that's not kind of something that can be expanded out to feed everyone because it just wouldn't.
I don't think that would be the idea. Jennifer, what is symbiotic? It's the idea that we can have a relationship with, say, chickens, which is mutually beneficial. So they give eggs and we give shelter and food.
It's basically they pay rent. Yeah, it's give and take in Tobias's mind.
Yeah,
you could have
they essentially pay rent with their eggs, with their feathers, with their wool, with their effort, whatever. Yeah, that's the relationship he's talking about. But the real danger of that is how quickly, if that was sort of like put forward, would that get exploited to, it's not quite as good as your setup.
But that was how it all started, wasn't it?
Of course, yeah. It wasn't factory farms at the beginning. We're literally just regressing.
Yeah, that's how it started. And then, of course, as demand increased and, the technology became available, that's when when factory farming came in, but it all
It's a little bit like this idea of ahimsa milk, because they're not going to kill anyone, and so therefore, what do you do with the males? And so therefore, they would just look after them and care for them, and then eventually you're going to get to a stage where that's just not economically viable. In terms of Tobias's little egg factory, where is he going to get the chicks from? And so you're straight into the industry then. You're plugging yourself into the user industry.
Yeah, I mean, because there is a kind of problem, isn't there, with people getting these, the expatriate hens, because more often than not, the farmer is paid to supply those hens, and so that money is going into.
It's even worse than that, Ronnie, because they get paid more than the slaughter rate.
That's absolutely right. I was about to say they usually get a better rate per bird than they would
Yeah.
usually.
So all that does is perpetrate their business. So really, all those resources that he used.
That's a good point though, because he's either got. I mean, for the most part, he admitted that they were expatriate hens, so they're not going to be able to breed naturally. So the only way he's going to be able to replenish his stock, so to speak, is to keep buying them from the farmer or to breed them.
Yeah, and then there's also a problem in terms of, like, where does the food come from to feed those hens, and even to feed pigs, and to this idea of, like, grazing. Well, the problem with grazing is in general is that's land that could be rewilded if we were able to, if everyone lived on a vegan diet, then so much of that grazing land could be rewilded.
Well, I think it'd be like this, actually. If you think about, say, Kathleen Janaway's idea of kind of autonomous vegan villages based basically on wood, well, Leonard would say, well, what's wrong with having a few chickens scratching around in the yard as well, right? That's what he'd say.
You still have to you still have to provide food for those chickens, though. You still have to feed them with grain and stuff like that, so food still has to be grown to feed them. They don't live on nothing, do they? You see, so that you have to take into consideration that as well, and the fact that it would be far better to use the food grown on that land directly to feed humans.
Yeah, and I mean, not to mention, none of this takes into consideration that even if the chickens have got the best existence ever, they don't consent to this. You're still assuming consent, and if you're going to assume consent, it stops nobody else somewhere else assuming consent.
Yeah, it's kind of similar to saying, well, it's okay to have slaves because I'm going to provide them with, a lovely place to live. I'm going to provide them with food, in exchange for them, being under my control, and in exchange for the labour that they can do for me. Now, that's still exploitation, isn't it? That's still not right.
Anyway, we've got everybody in today. Jennifer's got a migraine. Kerry is drunk, and Graham says that he's given himself sunstroke. He's burnt to bits and feeling.
I've just noticed that,
feeling
Kerry. I'm drunk as fuck. It's 8:15, Kerry. What's going on?
I don't think that whether or not people are given food and housing prevents them being slaves. It's a question of the slavery.
Well, yeah, I mean, the slaves had food and housing, right?
Yeah, the slavery to do with the control that's exerted over them, that they have to obey the orders of another person. That's where the slavery comes in.
Yeah, you wouldn't have had a slave.
One of the things he's changed his mind about, hasn't he? He's kind of basically saying that veganism isn't everything that's right, and animal use isn't everything that's wrong. That's basically what he's saying now.
Yeah.
I mean, like, what disturbed me a little bit, Andy, was the audience. I mean, the first person, although asked a critical question, was saying, "Oh, I've read your book and I liked it."
I know, and I'm trying hard, basically, to come to your way of thinking. Like, yeah,
she said you've kind of convinced me not to be a radical.
Yeah, which is like. Why are you reading his book and thinking that he's right? This is what I don't understand. What is it that is attracting vegans to this idea? Is it the fact that they find it a bit difficult and his way is like, I ain't got to do anything now?
Oh, yeah, well, that's the easy bit. It's the same as Peter Singer. I mean, basically what they're both doing is giving them an easier version of of something that they can go, oh, I'm doing something, but it's not as hard as that,
Yeah,
But it's not.
yeah. Well, that's what it seems like the appeal is. Yeah.
The thing is, it's not hard anyway.
No,
What's
it's
all
not. It's really not hard. And the thing is,
vegan
it's
fucking hard?
difficult, isn't it? It's more
Bloody hard.
difficult if you don't make the connection. If you don't understand the why, if
Yeah,
you don't actually understand the cause of what you're doing, then yeah, potentially it does seem like a chore for the most part because you have to keep rationalizing it to yourself.
if people think it's hard. In other words, to kind of live in society as a vegan and to kind of you know source your food and all that. People think that's hard. They go back 50 odd years ago when I first became vegan. And even then, I wouldn't have said it was hard. I said it needed a bit of working out, but I never thought it was hard. I mean, it's far harder for the animals that are exploited and slaughtered and oppressed when people aren't vegan, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's not.
yeah. And
Not hard. Not hard.
Leslie Cross says in the Dust and
No,
War that he went vegan during the middle of the Second World War. Probably never been a harder time to
no,
successfully do
no,
it, but yet still managed it.
no. It's not hard, and I think we've got to get away from that. No, it's not. Isn't hard. It's one of those things that it's kind of easy when you know how. I think I think that saying applies to it. That there's certain things kind of like you kind of need to know, and you need to know where to get certain stuff. But it's like so much easier now. I mean, like one example is plant milks, for instance. There's a proliferation. I'll say it in a minute. Proliferation of plant milks. You can get them anywhere. Right at the beginning when we were looking for stuff to put in our tea and all that, there was like very, very, very little choice back in those days. But now there's massive, and it's like available everywhere. It's just like falling off a log.
Yeah, yeah. But like I said, I always think if you actually understand the why and that's your motivation, as opposed to, well, it's a bit cruel what happens to animals, you'll make that effort. In the same sense
Yeah,
that if you know that you're allergic to nuts, you'll make sure you go through 20 different products or 20 different restaurants until you find something that's suitable for you to eat because you haven't got a choice in the matter. So when you make the connection, that's the same way. You don't see it as a chore. You don't see it as like, oh, I've got to do this. It's the opposite is something that I either fundamentally oppose or can't do. So there isn't a choice. It takes that choice completely out of the equation in the same way that if it was a medical condition and you don't have an option in it, it just takes all of that choreness or that hardness or whatever anyone can
yeah,
imagine, takes
yeah.
that away.
It's just like what I'll say to people, because the cheese is a big thing. You get people kind of they'll come to the store. I've tried all the vegan cheeses, and I can't find one that's the same as the cheese from the cow's milk. And I said, well, why? First of all, why are you trying to compare it to start with?
And is
Why?
that the voice they use, Ronnie, is it?
Yeah, it's kind of quite similar to that. Yeah, it can be higher or lower in a bit like that. Yeah, a slightly whingy voice. And so I said, well, don't why are you trying to compare it? Just like treat it as a product in its own right. And that said, secondly, what would you do? Say you could no longer get, cheese made from cows, dairy cheese. What would you do? I said, you wouldn't die, would you? You wouldn't die if you could no longer get it. Oh no. I said, well, just sort of treat it like as if you can no longer get it, or you just can't eat it because you don't need it. It's only a taste. You don't need to eat it. So it's like people make such a big thing over that. I just don't, I don't get it. I really don't. It's only a taste at the end of the day, like all these animal products.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I've had conversations with people where you've made a suggestion for them and they completely dismiss it. The doctor's made a similar suggestion. And it's like, oh, the doctor said I've got to cut this out of my diet, and they've cut it out overnight. So they can do it. They can absolutely do
Yeah,
it.
it's possible to do it. Yeah, just people have got like kind of their priorities are wrong. They put their sense of taste above. Like you've said to someone that you're prepared, for animals to be slaughtered, and often all the terrible suffering that goes along with that, just to provide you with a certain taste. And how can that ever be justifiable? It can't be, can it? It's only a taste at the end of the day. And
Only a taste.
Well, the worst thing about that only a
Yeah.
taste is it's not even the taste of flesh that they enjoy. It's the taste of plants that apparently they're
Yeah.
against.
But you see,
Yeah.
like a lot of people, I'd say, well, look, are you opposed to animals being, being exploited for entertainment? Like there'll be people opposed to like the use of animals in circuses, for instance, and people will go, yeah, I'm against that. But you see, the consumption of animal products is exactly the same because people are basically consuming them for their own entertainment, because they enjoy the taste. They don't need. There's no necessity in consuming them. So it's like very much in the same category as animals being exploited for human entertainment in other ways, isn't it? It's like no different in that sense from like horse racing with all the casualties of horse racing or dog racing or animals in circuses or anything like that, is it? Or even hunting, where animals are killed for the entertainment of humans. It's kind of no different.
Very true.
Yeah, Kim Stolwood did a talk once, and although he normally talks about welfare and politics and stuff, he did say that the vegan just doesn't see products derived from other animals as food. And so it's not a deprivation because you just don't see it that way.
Yeah.
No, I never looked at it as a deprivation at all. Even way back, I just said, well, like, there's no way that, for me, that isn't food because of how that's obtained means that like it's just a total no-go area, and so I'm not even going to consider it.
Yeah, it's very similar to that egg post that we were discussing last week that all kicked off on Facebook. If you're craving eggs and that's what you still see them as, you haven't made the connection, I'm afraid. Because you shouldn't still see them as food. That shouldn't be what they're viewed as. There shouldn't even be a possibility that that's okay.
Yes, I mean, absolutely, yeah.
Well, I suppose you kind of a battle between the kind of visceral, kind of feeling and also the mental understanding, surely.
Oh, yeah, but this person was basically saying, like, they'd been vegan 4 years and they still craved eggs all the time. And it's like, well, you shouldn't even see them as that. If you haven't sought a replacement already that you recognise and can use, why are you even thinking about this? Why is this your rationality? And everyone's thing was, well, backyard eggs are okay.
Oh yeah, the
The
amount of
encouragement
vegans.
was, well, it's all right to slip back. It's okay. If you've got a craving, you've got a craving. You've got to give in to that. That's more important than your morals.
Well, it's more, that craving's more important than the lives of those animals that are taken, and to provide eggs because even with free range, um, and backyard eggs, that still involves, the killing. What about the male, all the male chicks that are bred?
You do find though that it's quite often eggs that people have that sort of like they seem to be the one that people make the excuses for the easiest. I don't know why, but it's almost like, well, my nan's got chickens in their garden, therefore it makes it okay. Well, I suppose it's because most people don't have a cow in their back garden, I suppose, to make the comparison. But you do see them, it's chickens that always people make excuses about.
I think
Yeah,
it's
but
because egg production's automatic as well, isn't it? Like chickens will lay eggs if they're,
That's true, I suppose. Yeah, you haven't got to necessarily breed them or whatever like you
yeah.
would a cow. Yeah.
But it's not making the connection with the rights violations attached to that. Like I had a vegan saying to basically trying to tag their friend in who has an animal sanctuary. I'm going to use that term very loosely. Who sells eggs from there? So it's not a sanctuary; it's just a slightly better farm. And she was basically trying to talk about the welfare side of things. A vegan, by the way, who said that they don't eat eggs, but they wouldn't condemn another vegan who did. So I was like, well, think about the rights violations within that. But they just didn't get it. It was banging your head against the brick wall. And I was thinking, like, if these are people who are classifying themselves as vegans, I highly doubt any of them have actually looked at any of the philosophy whatsoever that veganism is based on.
I totally agree with that. I mean, one of the other things that I've noticed more recently as well, and I don't mean to criticize these people because I think genuinely they jump on these posts as quickly as they do because they think that's their form of activism. But have you noticed that every time in one of these groups where someone's like, I'm really interested in going vegan or I'm I don't know, day 2 of being vegan, what advice can I have? Everyone's advice is take it really slow, make sure you keep violating rights for the next 6 months or so. And that's everyone's advice. You don't ever seem to get the experienced vegans to go, no, ignore all that shit. This is what you should be doing. That doesn't happen.
Yeah, you
Well,
don't need.
that's another Tobias thing. Take it slow.
Hmm.
Yeah, you see, when I first went vegan, and I had got information from the Vegan Society, and kind of their information at the time was like, gradually replace stuff. That was from the Vegan Society. But what happened was, I found that so much. I found that so much of a pain in the arse. Thinking, well, how much cow's milk am I allowed today? Am I allowed to have an egg today? And in the end, after just a few days, I said, bugger this. I'm just going to go completely vegan, because it was actually easier than work
Well,
than
it is easy. Of course, it's
yeah,
easier, especially if you
yeah,
think of
yeah.
financially. It's definitely easier.
Yep. I
I
mean,
mean,
we
if we're trying to encourage people about saving money and all that kind of thing, it's definitely not cheaper for them to go and buy a pack of Beyond Burgers and their usual beef burgers. Is it? That's twice the price. So what? How is baby steps easing them into it? It's actually more difficult. They're better off just kind of doing it overnight.
we were looking at a gradual change towards plant-based when we first went plant-based for kind of health reasons. But we worked out when we were doing, like, because we were trying to meal plan, because I was initially thinking, what the hell am I going to eat? So we knew that we needed a plan. But I was like, there is going to be so much waste here. It's going to be unreal. So when I first went plant-based, it wasn't from an ethical point of view whatsoever. But we just went kind of all in. Um, I would say there was probably that bit of gradual at the beginning before the ethics kicked in, because I still had things like a jar of egg-based mayonnaise in the fridge that then got gradually used. But as soon as we made a connection with the animals, I had like a freezer full of dead bodies still about 2 months after going vegan, and as soon as we made a connection with the animals, they all went in the bin. It everything got around. We literally just turfed everything that we had that had kind of exploitation within it, and that was it. But we found that it was far more practical to go all in, because by the time you buy your stuff, it's just because I was looking at things thinking, well, that's going to waste. So when are we going to use that? And that's not going to, it's all going to go off and stuff. So it just wasn't practical. So I'm the same from my own experience. I think all in, but I can kind of see why from a non kind of, I don't know, trying to be not pushy, trying to make things as relatable as possible for people, to kind of that gradual transition. It's not something I advocate for personally, to be honest with you. I just think I'm the same as you guys. I think once the ethics kick in, I think the actions follow.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when people talk about baby steps and slow progress and all that sort of stuff, they haven't connected properly with it either. Because you would never do that with any other form of oppression. You'd never say to someone, "Can you be a bit less racist? Can you tone down your racism? Just try to go to a few less racist marches a month." You just would never ever approach anyone with that same. So I think that's a big part of it as well. The people that are explaining this, they haven't connected with the why properly, which is why they can't explain it to others. They're still relying on that emotional shock. That's
Yes,
pretty much all they've got.
but I'm going to cut down on my mugging. I'm only going to mug beef.
Yeah, exactly. Like when it comes to any other form, no one's ever going to suggest this. Never.
I'm only going to rob, elderly people like 5 days a week, and then I'll reduce it to
Yeah,
four.
can you? I mean, the free range argument is basically, yeah, but all the people I rob are rich. They can afford to lose the money.
Yeah, yeah. The meat-based version of Robin Hood.
Yeah, but that's pretty much the same argument, isn't it?
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
it's fine. The people I rob, they won't even miss the money. They're okay. They're happy with it. They don't mind. They've got insurance.
Yeah,
That's the
they're just
same
the rich to
argument.
feed the poor.
It's probably more justification actually for my argument. But never
Yeah,
mind.
Yeah,
probably.
yeah. Yes. I think the mugging one's probably closer to it because
But yeah, it's exactly the same thing at the end of the day. I
yeah.
mean, in France, the quite often says, I'll do two less rapes a week. Then is that okay? Like when you put it in those extremes, it sounds absurd. Just because it is absurd.
Or
It's just the
only
fact that we're so conditioned to think that chickens are okay to talk about in this way, or cows are okay to talk about in this way.
yes, yeah, yeah. That's right. Mug free Monday. I was going to start a mug free Monday.
Mug free Monday. I might participate
Yeah,
in that, to be honest,
yeah,
because I haven't got to change anything. I don't usually mug anyone on a Monday as it is.
Yeah, you got to use a cup that day. The thing is, the argument against that would be that if any of those activities were as prevalent as animal uses, then those things might actually become useful then, because in other words, 98% of people were mugging people left, right, and centre, then the actual idea of reducing might kind of make more sense then.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
suppose so. But I suppose even if you take some really extreme examples, things that do happen all the time, like stealing, it still would seem nonsensical.
Do you not think that the
Yeah, but you'd have to think that everybody is stealing rather than just stealing is happening all the time.
Well, I suppose a lot of people are stealing if you wanted to get to the nitty gritty. Even most self-employed people aren't declaring their full earnings. That's stealing if we want to get to the nitty gritty.
And also speeding.
Yeah, yeah, all of those. Basically, every time you bend
like
the rule in some way for your
like loads of
advantage.
people speed. That doesn't make it right, does it? I'm only going to I'm going to stop breaking the speed limit on Monday, but I'm going to carry on breaking it like all the other days of the week.
Or swearing then. Pretty much everyone swears, right? I'm only going to swear on a Monday.
you know what you're talking about? I
Make the world a
never
lot more
swear.
polite.
Never ever swear.
I've never been able to stick to that one.
Do we not think that this opposition against veganism compared to other social justice movements comes from the fact that if you're not racist to support anti-racism, all you really need to do is not be racist, which is a non-action. Whereas veganism very much requires a change of lifestyle, doesn't it? It requires you to take an action, even though we say that it is a non-action. It leads to a non-action because it leads to the avoidance of exploitation of others, but actually it can be a big change within your own lifestyle. To be a feminist, all you need to do is not oppose the rights of women. To be, to not be racist, all you need to do is to not be racist. To not be homophobic, all you have to do is not hate people that, love others of the same gender. Whereas to be vegan, you need to actively not contribute towards the exploitation, oppression, harm of others, which requires a little bit of change of lifestyle when you are doing
Also, I suppose the big part of it as well is even if somehow you had it all laid on a plate, let's say like your partner was already vegan and you decided to make the change. So in terms of like products and all that stuff, she's going to take care of everything for you. You haven't got to buy everything. You've still got to acknowledge that everything that you've been doing for X amount of time is wrong. Most people are naturally not racist, so they can join those movements without having to even change the way they used to think, right? Because they never thought that way. Whereas this is a massive shift even in their own thinking, because they have got to take some acknowledgement and responsibility. You can't do it any other way. Even if everything else was on a plate for you, you've still got to go, shit, what I was doing for most of my life was wrong. And I suppose there isn't for that acknowledgement with most of these other movements, is it? Most of the people that join them are already in agreement with them.
Yeah, I think there is something in that. It's a social psychology point that I made in my PhD, which was that very thing that you almost have to say, you have to kind of own up and go, up until now, I've been making these ethical errors on a, 3 or 4 time daily basis.
Yeah.
And, and there's kind of very few people that have to do that. Even if you're, say, become a staunch environmentalist, it's not as though you're down the IKEA every, 4 times a day, so it's a difference in scale, I suppose.
Yeah, that's very true. Because I mean, look at just some of the examples where people like ex-footballers and things like that have got involved in some of the anti-racism campaigns, and then they found a tweet from 10 years ago where they've said one thing that they probably shouldn't have said, and it's like that gets. So if you can imagine, if you're actually sat there thinking, I've been doing this 3 or 4 times a day, every day for the past 40 years. Yeah, that's quite a lot of accountability that you've suddenly got to have catch up with you. Most people haven't got to go through those motions. So I understand that part of it, definitely. And sometimes that takes a while because you don't even realise half the things that you have contributed to. You might think about food initially, but you won't think about all the other things. I mean, we still find out things all the time that have got animal products in that you wouldn't necessarily think about. But we haven't actually touched on the subject that we were supposed to be talking about. Never mind.
That's not at all very similar to how this usually goes, to be honest with you.
No, I was just enjoying the chat, to be perfectly honest.
We normally get an hour and a half
we were supposed to be talking about intersectionality, considering it's...
Well, also the definitional issues that cropped up today, because I'm thinking that there's a rather large problem really in the movement, in the sense that if you imagine yourself as a vegan curious person or somebody who's kind of pretty new to the movement, and you Google things like, vegan definition, Donald Watson quotes, this kind of stuff, you're going to get a lot of stuff which is not accurate. But there's a lot of it. There's a great deal of it. In fact, there's more inaccurate stuff than accurate stuff. Yeah. And this is a big problem. So with the with the definition, it was kind of thing that we noticed in the Animal Rights Show, where if you remember the story, I was talking to Jeremy Hess about the definition, and he said, "Oh, it's this," and he read out the kind of reducitarian version. I said, "That's not the definition." So we went to the definition page of the Vegan Society, and he goes, "Well, look, there it is." And I said, "Well, just scroll down," and there was the full one.
Yeah.
And so he actually wrote to the Vegan Society and said, "We need you to put your definition at the top, because most people think it's your kind of, your kind of slimmed down version, which is almost like a subtitle. That's what they're using it for, right?"
Yeah.
And so quite often you get the same thing happening over and over again. First of all, the thing about veganism as a philosophy, that bit is always cut out. So those first 4 words are cut out. So it starts off with veganism is a lifestyle change or something like that. And then the end part where it talks about for the benefit of other animals, humans, and the planet, that kind of all that is usually cut off as well.
Yeah.
And so you've just got a bit from the middle. But what you'll find is that bit, which is only a small version of the real thing, is everywhere. It's just kind of absolutely everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. When I was trying to find pictures for the film of Donald Watson and stuff like that, and I was trying various searches, you won't believe how many memes there are that exist with his face on and that definition. And they've all been made by people. It's not like the Vegan Society.
Which is why, I had that today on Instagram. Somebody said, well, according to Donald Watson's 1944 definition, and of course that doesn't exist. It's just that according to all these memes, they do. It does.
Yeah, and those memes, I remember from doing the research and trying to find the pictures. Those memes massively outnumber anything legitimate.
Yep, and I suppose if you've not read any literature by the founders of the vegan movement, you won't realize that actually it was, the Vegan Society was founded in 1944.
Of course not. Take it at face level. You've heard of Donald Watson briefly. You know it's 1944. The definition that's on the Vegan Society.
That bit's not true, Andy. I had somebody today saying, "Oh, I didn't know that the Vegan Society went back that long." Justin here in the chat is saying, "I've heard a vegan say the 1979 definition is the oldest one yesterday," and I said, "No, it's not."
Yeah, quite a lot of people refer to that one as being the oldest one. That's the one that was coined by that one dude and that other dude. But, that dude, not the oldest one.
Many people might not realise that the lack of definition was actually a very purposeful thing, however, because obviously they wanted the movement to grow into what it needed to become, didn't they, without restriction.
Well, I don't know about purposeful. I think what Cross would say is it didn't do any harm for those first years. I'm not quite sure that they go, okay, so right, for the first 6 years we're not going to do anything about the definition. I don't think it was purposeful. I just think that because eventually he wrote his first of his thinking out loud essays and saying we don't have a definition and it's not been a problem, but it's going to be pretty soon.
Yeah.
So therefore, that's what he said, right?
He also kind of alludes to the fact that some of the avoidance at first to come out with anything was the fact that some people got poorly and they needed to tackle that part before they started talking about ethics, basically, which also makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is why a lot of people say, well, isn't the focus of veganism about health? It kind of was a big part of what they had to deal with. But that was never what they had in mind for veganism. It's just that it's kind of what the first thing they had to do. Not least because, as we know, everyone said that they were going to become seriously ill, if not die.
Yeah, and let's be honest, we still get those kind of comments now. When people talk about the lack of protein or the lack of nutrients or all the vegans they see as
long-term veganism is not possible, by which they mean something like over 7 years or something.
Yeah.
I mean, back in 1944, I suppose what they would have had to overcome is the fact that they needed to prove that it wasn't just, a one-way ticket to martyrdom for yourself, for your cause, because that would have been the fact that they had none of this research in science, or very little research in science, apart from starting to connect the dots to cancers and stuff, with reference to health. So I suppose that would have been a big barrier because you would have just had the assumption that you needed to eat this omnivorous diet as they were getting pushed at to be healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
one of the things as
Watson
well
deals
that,
with it in the first couple of issues of the magazine. He says, we do have several people now who are being completely plant-based for several years. So we're starting to get, but he did say we don't really have the hard and fast kind of dietetic evidence. It's just
yeah.
that we've got a lot of anecdotal evidence. That's what he was saying.
We also need to take into consideration that obviously there's the few meetings and annual events and stuff that they would have all met up at, but for the most part, these people were corresponding by mail. So
Yeah.
it's not these conversations were taking months to have, not 2 minutes on the phone. They weren't texting one another. One person would write a letter, it would get read by a few people, it would get written back to. These are weeks that would pass during this time.
Only the rich ones could do texting. So you get Donald Watson sending a letter to Cross, who texts back, and then he'd
Is
have to
that,
send a
yeah,
letter.
I mean, that was one of the things that I was thinking about when I was narrating the essays, though, where he talks about like how it was formed and it's the correspondence and the vegetarian messenger, and it's like, but this could have been going on for months.
Yeah.
When you read it, you think, oh, yeah, they all messaged in this day and the group
Yeah,
was
but
formed.
that's not even just sending letters to each other, Andy. That is, as it were, getting what you want to say in the kind of almost like the letters page. It's a
Yeah,
little
it's
bit.
what
I
I'm
mean,
saying. It's what I'm
one
saying.
you
That
remember this is the
correspondence
fact
could have
that
taken a long time.
And back
yeah,
in 1944, it wasn't
it's
always
like
texting; it
if
was
you remember
Morse
the
code.
BYV and the Adelaide and everything, they came out 4 times a year, and so you would see something, and then you would write back, but that didn't come out then for 2 or 3 months.
Yeah, and that's if your letter was picked, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It's interesting in the text because there's text that accompanies this on my screen. When you said letters page, it came up as lettuce page.
Well, maybe
So very vegan.
that's the version by the Onion.
Yeah, that's the
Version by
one.
the Union.
Yeah.
That's clever.
But it is in a sense, if people are completely messed up about the definition, it's kind of not their fault. Now, where it becomes their fault is when they're kind of bloody minded and stubborn about it. Is when somebody said, "Well, actually," and I guess really it's then a question of if we want to kind of say to people, "Well, all that stuff that you thought you knew isn't true," right? So it's then a question of how to do it, I suppose.
Yeah, it comes back to that acknowledgement again, doesn't it? Especially when people have put the time and the effort into making changes and think that they've already learnt this stuff, and then they have to kind of relearn it again. Most people don't want to get
I think
that.
it's a pride thing, Andy. I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely, I would agree. Yeah. So, serious question, because obviously you go back, the further you go back, in fact, to the very start, it's always been human inclusive. So, despite their claims to the contrary that the last couple of years people have tried to make veganism all about humans, when actually did it stop being about humans? When did that happen?
I think it's also a question of how it's about humans, though, because what some people say is yes, humans are mentioned. I mean, Surge of Freedom, humans are mentioned, but it's like, veganism is also beneficial, will also be beneficial to humans in various ways. In other words, that by treating animals properly, that kind of has a knock-on effect in terms of humans as well, in terms of health, in terms of maybe making people gentler and more considerate, perhaps that kind of thing. And that isn't the same as saying that veganism itself is about is opposed to the exploitation of humans in the same way that it's opposed to the exploitation of other animals. That's different. That's a bit different, isn't it?
Yeah. But there's quite a lot of other allusions with the essays. I mean, he literally talks about how we can never experience freedom or liberation, whilst others are not free or liberated.
Yeah, and Watson says, we're not going to get one without getting them all, which is what everybody says. But to answer your question, sorry, I had to dash out and do some with the cat just then. But you're asking about when the change might have been. I
Yeah,
think,
because obviously the accusation is basically that the new generation, have brought this human element in, and it was never there. But obviously, I know different. So what I'd like to know is when did the actual opposite occur? When did it start being non-animals only?
well, I think it probably was a very slow process. First of all, I've noticed, for example, doing the time tunnels, that the language starts to change in the 1960s and into the 1970s. You get a lot more use of things like animal cruelty and this kind of stuff,
Yeah.
and a lot more of that kind of which was always there, but it was almost like subsumed under words like exploitation and stuff. Whereas it starts to become more prominent. And I think that's when the society, the vegan society, becomes accepted as part of the international, animal scene, as it were, and they start getting news from all over the country and all over the world. So that starts to change the language. So I think you're talking about late 60s and into the 1970s. But in terms of this accusation, that is really kind of new, it seems to me. I mean, Ronnie, can you remember any time, 80s and 90s when somebody said, "Oh, you're trying to make it all about yourself. You're selfish and all this." I mean, that just wasn't. It wasn't an accusation against us, was it? Really, in those days.
Um, no, because I think that a lot of people that around in those days, were concerned about human rights as well as animal rights, and they kind of just felt it was natural to be so. If you see
Yeah.
what I mean. So there wasn't. So they weren't
It was just
people.
like part of them. I mean, I always say
Yeah,
this thing about the fact that you go to a demo on a Saturday and maybe a national march on a Sunday, or you go on some NAL thing, or maybe even something a bit more illegal. But then during the week, you'd find yourself at a Rock Against Racism gig, or you'd be doing something like Reclaim the Night, a feminist inspired thing, and nobody batted an eyelid at doing that really in
no,
those days.
no, that's true. No, it was just thought of as being like a natural thing to do. Like for instance, I was very involved in the squatting movement, and you know, finding homes for homeless people and stuff like that. And I didn't consider that as being anything.
And like the food not bombs thing, that was part of it
Yeah,
too,
yeah,
right?
yeah. To me, it kind of all went together. Whether I considered, I don't necessarily think I considered that it was part of being vegan to do those things. I just think probably with me it was doing those things and being vegan came from the same place.
Yeah,
It
but
was all
it's what vegans did though, Ronnie.
it's what vegans did. It was all about
You
being a
know.
decent. This is what being a decent person is.
Yes.
Really, you don't want to be involved in the exploitation of other animals. You'll campaign against exploitation and oppression, and you'll also campaign against the exploitation and oppression of all
Hmm.
the humans. There wasn't anything contradictory in those things.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing, and I think this is probably what Andy is getting at in the end, is the fact that we've now got this kind of allegation that there are people in the movement now who are actually diverting people away from doing an animal thing to doing a human thing. Well, first of all, it's very difficult when you ask people, because they make that allegation, but then you go, okay, give me names and all that, and then they never can. So I think there's, I don't know, we're starting to get the impression that this kind of allegation is based on almost like phantoms, not real people. It's just like an idea that a lot of people have got in their head, and they've got it very kind of strongly. I said in my interview that was out today that a lot of people are claiming that we're trying to bring things into the movement like human rights, whereas really they're trying to take issues out of the movement.
Exactly that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's just if a person is you know is concerned about justice, then they're going to be concerned about justice across the board, aren't they? Whether those injustices are performed against humans or they're performed against other animals. Someone to be consistent is going to be opposed to all of those things. And I think that I don't really kind of see it as a problem. I don't see this happening. I don't see people being kind of persuaded or encouraged to do human relation activities instead of activities related to campaigning for other animals. I kind of don't really see that. I don't experience. I don't experience that. I mean, the problem isn't that you've got people that people spend some of their time campaigning on human rights issues and another part of their time campaigning on animal rights issues. Well, that's great. They are campaigning on animal rights issues. The problem is the two big problems. Number one huge problem: the huge number of people that don't really care about either. The huge number of people that aren't vegan, right? And then second problem: the huge number of people that call themselves vegans that actually don't campaign for anything, that are just cupcake vegans. Those are the two problems. That's where the focus needs to be, not on the fact that somebody might spend some of their time campaigning for human rights as well as campaigning for other animals.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, let's just say there is some of these people out there that are more interested in the human right aspect than the non-human right aspect. They're so few and far between, but I'm sure just off the top of our head, we can think of a few people that have picked, say, doing a welfare or a single issue, or just for like Millions and Marshall a few weeks ago over the Animal Rights March, for example. Was there any pushback about that? I mean, is that not exactly the same? Are you not prioritizing?
Yeah, it's a bit weird, this one, because there's quite a few nuances here. Say Millions and Marshall. A lot of non-vegans are involved there, right? But
Yeah.
when you talk to people who are having a go about so-called intersectionals, they're when they describe what's going on, it's clear that they're getting pushback from non-vegan intersectionals as they see them, right?
Yeah.
So it's the same as with the welfarists. So you've
Exactly.
got non-vegan welfarists, non-vegan intersectionals, so-called, but they don't seem to even register the welfare side of it. It's all about intersectionals as some threat to the movement, and they don't seem to register the welfare side of it at all, which is all a bit weird to me.
Yeah, and I mean the welfare side of it is absolutely rife. None of us can think of an example of this intersectional issue, but I'd only have to open my Facebook or my Instagram and scroll for 10 seconds to find you something that's welfare.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah,
And
welfare is everywhere. I mean, where is the intersectionality?
No idea.
I know I put a post on a UK vegan group on Facebook today. I purposely made it quite controversial with the wording, and the tagline that kept coming up was "Veganism to me is."
Yeah.
And I think that links back to what you were saying earlier on, Roger, with the issue with the not understanding the definition and what it actually means, or the whole definition, and only having that one sentence, because then people are interpreting what veganism is to them. And I understand they can have an opinion on what veganism is, but at the end of the day, veganism, it's a philosophy, and it's quite clear what veganism is, really, isn't it?
Well, clearly not, though. That's the problem.
Yeah, I think it is clear if you've actually got the whole picture, but so many people get influenced first, then educated second, or not at all in some cases. So
Well,
when you're being,
the mystery there then, Kev, is not only are there people who don't have the full picture, there are some people who actually will go out of their way not to get the full picture right. And so that's the mystery as far as I can see.
yeah,
Do you think it stems from people see these horrific atrocities committed by humans against other animals, and so therefore they
Yeah, so
they
it's goodies and baddies. The humans are the
they say
baddies.
the
Yeah,
humans are the baddies.
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't want to do anything at
Yes.
all help humans, and I don't like it that anyone else does anything else to help humans. And I see people that I regard as intersectionals as doing things to help humans, and I
Yeah.
don't like that
Yeah, the
because
example given every time, Ronnie,
yeah,
is the fact that you're not only trying to get people out of Auschwitz, but you're trying to take care of the guards as well.
Yeah,
That's quite a good analogy. I had a conversation earlier on today about how we don't have, as a movement, we don't necessarily have enemies to the movement. We don't have enemies that we're fighting. We've got people that we're trying to influence and educate, um, including people that work in a slaughterhouse. They are not our enemy. And it's like, for me, it's like, where does it see anywhere in the literature or the philosophy or anything that's kind of, influenced the way that the movement goes, where it states to free all sentient life from oppression apart from those who are actively partaking in that oppression. We can oppress them all we like, cause them psychological and physical harm
Well, I
as much
think
as
the
we want.
thing there, Ronnie, I don't know if you remember this, but you used to make a big thing about the difference between those who were innocent and those who weren't. So you used to make a moral difference between, say, a butcher and the customers of a butcher. I don't know whether you would still do that.
well, yes, I think there's degrees of culpability. For instance, say you have a criminal gang, and there's a leader and planner of the criminal gang, and then you've got all the various ranks of the criminal gang. They're not all equally culpable for what that criminal gang does. Obviously, the leader of the gang would be more culpable than the ones lower down, and I kind of see it. I kind of see it like that. I see that the organisers, instigators, and promoters of the oppression of other animals are more culpable than.
Yeah, this leads to a really interesting thing for me because a lot of people say there's two competing strands now, which is, well, there's been so much vegan activism, there's been so many exposés and everything. There's no such thing now as an innocent person who doesn't know, and yet we see it every day. People totally ignorant still about just about every aspect of animal use, whether it's the fact that cows are mammals or that they have to be pregnant and all this kind of stuff. So there's this kind of we've got a kind of, well, nobody is innocent anymore, and yet there's still a lot of people who are just totally ignorant of what's going on. So that is a form of innocence in a way.
Uh, well, I mean, possibly, but I think it's more, to me, it's more about the practicalities of how you go about dealing with it. To kind of, um, if you want to spread veganism as far and wide as possible,
Yeah, but I'm
to
talking about what they know, Ronnie.
what they know. Well, yes, it's kind of mind-boggling, isn't it? Really, when people come up with those statements, but is that what they know, or is it kind of what they want to believe? And there's like a little, is it a willful ignorance in a sense? Like kind of, wanting to ignore, what the truth is so that they can carry on doing what they've always done. I think there perhaps is an element of that in
yeah.
involved.
I mean, I was about to
No,
say
no, but wait a
it's
minute, wait a minute on that one. I mean, we've got the evidence from generations of vegetarians, and the one thing they say is, "Geez, I never knew." I mean, these were active vegetarians. They
I
often said
yeah,
they were
I,
vegetarians for moral reasons, and then they claimed they had no idea about the egg industry, they had no idea about the dairy industry, and yet they
I,
were vegetarians.
oh yes, I mean that was very much the case with myself. I mean, I was vegetarian 2.5 years, had no idea what happened to the cows and calves and the hens and the chicks at all. I thought they just kind of were just, in the
But
field.
does
You know,
that wash now in 2023? Does that wash now? That's the question, isn't it?
I think I think there's kind of less chance of people being in the situation um, that I was in because uh, it's a greater spread of information now. I think I think it kind of depends. I mean, we maybe presume that vegetarians are exposed to the same sort of information as we are, and see the but it kind of depends on, because it's obvious that that's part of an animal that you're eating, isn't it? And that's like really really obvious.
Yeah, but so the people who claim innocence, are they lying to us or are they really innocent?
I think it kind of I think it kind of depends. I think there are people that kind of don't want to go there. You know, I mean, I've kind of known vegetarians that kind of they've got the attitude, well, I've gone this far and I don't want to hear about it anymore because that's going to if I hear about that and then I have to act accordingly, I'm going to have to change my life.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's a
yeah,
fine
Deeply
line
influenced.
between I didn't know and I made sure that I didn't know.
Yeah.
yeah. But
Well,
but
the other thing I was going to add, though, I mean, obviously I don't disagree with what you're saying. Ari, the butcher or the farmer has got more culpability than the customer per se. I mean, but also, especially going back a few decades, you'd potentially be looking at the butcher or the farmer or whomever has potentially been indoctrinated or socialized 10 times more than the general public. They'd have been going out and helping dad milk the cows from 3 or 4 years old. They'd have had it drilled into them how important that this is, that they earn this amount of money every year. They've actually got like those pressures. They could quite equally say, well, I never thought about it in any other way than what was told to me.
Yeah, well, the massive variable there, Andy, is animal welfareism.
Yeah.
mm,
Yeah.
it's a bit like a mafia family, isn't it? You're born into a mafia family. You're going to do what your dad did and your granddad did, and everybody.
Yeah, because taking the crime boss example, the person at the top normally isn't some guy that started at the bottom as an entrepreneur. They're normally kind of inherited it from their dad or their granddad or their brother or whatever. It's normally like they've already got that built-in respect given to them, handed to them. So I suppose it works in similar ways, but it doesn't necessarily absolve their guilt. It just gives them that equal ignorance to plead in the same way that a vegetarian can turn around in 2023 and genuinely say, "Oh, I didn't know," and it's
Yeah,
like, well,
but but I think it's it's more about the practicalities of how we can deal with and like kind of um you know kind of attacking people isn't really the best way of how we solve the problem, so to speak. I mean, these things all go on. you know we have animal farming and we have the fishing industry and all the horrors that accompany those things, because people consume animal products. And so basically, what you have to do is educate people to become vegan. And you can't, that won't succeed if we approach it in a like I'm blaming you type way. So
Well, ironically, Ronnie, one of Leonard's lines used to be, "Most people eat meat because most people eat meat." So that's a sociological statement, and of course that is kind of true. In other words, sociologically, most people are conformists,
yeah.
and so most people just fit in to the norms and values, mores of society, because the cost of not doing that is quite high compared with just going with the flow, right? I mean, that's just common sense.
Yeah,
yeah,
we've seen examples of that, haven't we? Like with the horse meat scare, for example, where all of a sudden everyone was absolutely appalled by something they partake in every single day of the week because there was a chance that the animal that they thought they were consuming was a different one.
Yeah.
but you see, you have this we've had this with situations regarding the oppression of humans. I mean, like, you know, would Hitler have been able to do what he did without widespread support from the public in Nazi Germany? No. How many people, ordinary members of the public at the time, were opposed to the slave trade, were opposed
Yeah.
to slavery, and then also we go back to other atrocities committed against animals, which are now unthinkable. To almost everyone, such as bear baiting and bull baiting, dog fighting, those things. Huge numbers of people used to attend those contests, and it may well have been that most people weren't opposed to those things at the time that they were going on. So you've kind of got you've got that as well.
Well,
That
it's the
change.
sociology of it.
Yeah,
It's the
so yeah,
sociology of it, though, isn't it? I mean, you think back to like the days of the Roman Colosseum. Like all of that was done. The gladiators, people fighting lions, people fighting bears. All of that was done to keep everyone away from looking at the political situation that was fucking everyone over. It was to keep everyone quiet about everything else, keep them entertained, keep the races going, keep the gladiators fighting, and that's what they'll be interested in, and it worked. And
Yeah,
all
it's,
these
it's
years
where you
later,
got
not a lot
bread and
changed.
circuses from, isn't it? That
Yeah,
phrase.
yeah.
Yeah. So it's the equivalent of the telly now, really. The telly
Pretty
is the
much, yeah, the telly, or you could even say the telly is dying and it's becoming TikTok, YouTube,
yeah
Twitch.
media. It's like you look on social media, and most of it's 99% of it's drivel, isn't it?
Yeah.
To be,
Well, I think the key difference now that people have never had in the past was all of those things were always really controlled, and you were either really special or really shit to get focused. Really, that's kind of how it worked. Whereas now with TikTok and all these other stuffs, anyone can do it, anyone can get involved, but also you've also got that appeal for the audience as well, that they can interact with the host. Whereas that used to be the selling factor of things like X Factor and Britain's Got Talent, all that crap, because you can vote. Because even if it costs you money, you can vote. You can have some interaction with the actual show whilst it's going on. And that's the real selling point of a lot of these things now. People can come in, and even if they just want to put bacon emojis, that's a reaction. They haven't got to write a letter to Ofcom and hope it gets read. They've reacted straight away, and we've seen it. That's what they want. That's the selling
yeah.
point that, people have never had that before.
No, I mean that's why it's so popular, isn't it? Where everyone's spending all their time instead of other things. You know, but
Well,
I
I'll
think
be honest, I get a lot of my news and information and stuff from TikTok these days. Not necessarily by choice. It's not like I go looking for it, but that's how I find out quite a lot of the stuff that's going on.
yes, I dare say. I think that's what social media has become a kind of channel for news as well, hasn't it? In that sense, But I think Roger and I we're going to do one of our still alives about social media soon, aren't we, Roger? So that should be an interesting one in a few
Yeah,
weeks' time.
mainly how to try to manipulate it for the greater good, I suppose.
Yeah, so how you can kind of, because it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? And it's how you kind of, you know, can get the good out of it and minimize the negative aspect of it, or how we encourage people to do that.
Have a listen to this. This is Joanna speaking. My uncle is a butcher, and hearing him talking about he enjoyed killing pigs. See, there's another variable in this, because you kind of think, well, nobody's going to enjoy that. It's just that they'll kind of rationalize it being done rather than them actually getting their jollies from it, kind of thing. But then you've got a situation where somebody is kind of alleging, at least, that they actually enjoy it. Now, whether that's some kind of weird defense mechanism.
I was about to say, I suppose you don't know whether it's a defense mechanism. I have to rationalize it in this way. How can I continue?
Yeah, but usually the way that they rationalize it, and this was one of the things in the Slaughterhouse book by Gail Aisnitz, and a lot of the Slaughterhouse operatives would say something like, "Well, somebody's got to do it." Now, obviously, that initial premise is not actually true, but if you think that somebody's got to do it, then the next step is, well, why shouldn't it be me? Because you've already accepted the first premise, even though we as vegans would challenge it. They've just accepted that as a given. Well, in the same way as you still see that. I mean, I saw a street interview today, I think, on some social media, and again, you've got somebody going, "Well, we've got to have meat, so kind of dot dot dot, so how then do we get it? This thing that we've got to have." The having to have it bit was a given as far as this guy was concerned.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas we would question the first premise. What they normally do is they get involved with the second premise, which is, well, okay, we've got to have this, so how do we get it? We're in the business of saying, no, you don't have to have that in the first place, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, yes.
That is how most people think, though, isn't it? That it's not for a lot of them. They don't see it as a choice. They do still see it as a necessity. That's their first argument. I mean, all these years later, and we're still trying to tell people that you're not going to die, you're not going to wilt away, you're not going to become protein
Well,
deficient.
again, you see that's one of the interesting things. I mean, we've been talking about certain kind of YouTube practices where there's this kind of species switch that goes on. And are you against animal abuse? And yes, I am. And what is that? Oh, that's kicking dogs and all that. And then you kind of going, yeah, you sound like me. That yeah, we're really on the same page here and everything. And then the activist tries to do a bit of a gotcha and switches species, right? And goes, yeah, but what about the ones that we take into the slaughterhouse and we hang them up, and slash their throats and everything? And the idea is to expose their hypocrisy. But what it actually does is just creates cultural confusion, because that's when they suddenly go, oh, well, that's an entirely different thing, right? And,
Yeah.
that's just the way that they see it. Well, no, oh yeah, but I mean that's not like kicking a dog. I mean, kicking a dog is terrible. Eating meat, that's a different thing, right?
But then you'd go on to explain why it wasn't different, wouldn't you? It would. The conversation wouldn't end there
Yeah,
unless
but
they.
all I'm saying, Ronnie, is that from the cultural point of view, there's a massive difference between those two things.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Hmm.
Yes, of course, that's right. And I mean, I
I
myself,
mean, hence the Yulin thing. I mean, that's why
yeah,
the Yulin
yeah,
thing is so emotive, because these horrible people are doing the wrong thing to the wrong species.
Yeah, but
Or
in
the right
saying
thing
that
to the wrong
though, and I
species.
mean, I've noticed that Jim's joined us, so he can sort of either disagree or agree with this. But those times where, let's just say, Viva or Animal Justice Project or one of these, they expose, say, a cow farmer where they're beating them unnecessarily with a stick or kicking the cow when they're falling over, any of that kind of stuff. The public and the rest of the farming community are against that. They still recognise that as excessive animal abuse, despite the fact that that cow is probably going to get sent and having their throat slit a few weeks later. The actual action of doing something that's not part of the job is still seen as abuse. You still see people complain about that kind of thing, or they expose it.
yeah. They'll say, well, no, that's not, that's not correct practice, but we do it, we deal these animals kind of correctly and humanely, so you know, it's
Yeah,
okay
but
to.
again, it's a cultural thing. I mean, essentially, they're going, well, yeah, we've got to routinely and systematically kill all these beings, but we don't have to be nasty about it.
Yeah,
Now, I mean,
basically
that
that.
from my
Yeah,
point
yeah.
of view is almost like, from a vegan point of view, that's kind of laughable.
I
But
can't. I can't remember. You might remember who it was, which one of the groups it was. But the photo is fairly sort of like, I don't want to say famous, but it's done the rounds quite a few times. It's a guy. It's a guy in a blue boiler suit, and he's basically hitting a cow with a stick repeatedly. It's definitely in England somewhere. I think
Yeah,
it might have been.
yeah,
But yeah, I can remember replying to comments on there from non-vegans who were basically saying, "Well, I know that obviously this happens. I know that this is what we do, but that's just totally unnecessary. There's no problem milking them. There's no problem sending them to be killed, but hitting them with a stick. Now that's where I draw the line. There was literally people that were saying that
I-
this isn't okay.
yeah.
you
People
see,
will say,
that's an entirely sensible thing to say within the culture.
Yeah. Which shows you though that they do recognise these abuses. They just don't see what happens in the requirement of food or milk or clothing or any of those things. That doesn't fall into that category. That's what's necessary as part of the
yeah.
process to get.
I mean, that's where the vegan education comes in. I think sometimes, I think it depends how these exposés are used, because it can be an attention grabber, can't it? And then once you've got people's attention, you can then take them down the road of saying yes, but yeah, you, you know, and you get them into a discussion, and they'll first of all say yeah, but I I think that's wrong, but it's okay to eat meat, for instance, or whatever, drink milk, and then you kind of, but it opens up a discussion, doesn't it, where you can explain why these other things are also not right.
There's
So
something in the chat from Jim which is really interesting.
yeah,
Hitting a cow with a stick is very vague. I've hit cows with a stick when necessary, and that goes back to the fact that the VIP, we had something called Tools of Injustice, and it was a display. What one part of the display was an electric so-called cattle prod, right? And a lot of farmers came up to us and said, why is that a problem that you're showing this as a tool of injustice? Because if we didn't use them, we'd have to use a stick. That's what they said,
Yeah.
right?
But the thing is, it's not necessary, because it's not necessary to farm animals. It's not necessary to,
No,
you
but
know.
that bit is there given already. You see, that's what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
that's what we challenge, because this is the thing that it isn't necessary, because animal farming is not necessary. It's not necessary, it's not necessary to breed animals and kill them at a really really young age. For,
Somebody
you
said
know,
cattle prods aren't used in the UK. I'm sure there's footage of that for a start, not least from the Animal Justice Project.
I mean, yeah, possibly so. But you see, whether or not they kind of irrelevant. I mean, the sort of baseline is that these animals are exploited. These animals are, are oppressed. These animals are only allowed to live a fraction of their natural life, and then sent off the slaughterhouse. Now that in a situation where we can live, without animal products, none of that is justifiable, and all of that is.
Yeah, Jim's got a comment here. It's incredible. It is necessary sometimes. Cows are strong animals and need proper persuasion.
Yeah,
Reminds me.
I was about to reply. Does that not tell you, when they say, well, we assume consent? Or could that not be the opposite of that anymore if they tried?
But of
I
course,
think Jim is right, though. I think, I don't know when it was, but I think that cattle prods are prohibited in the UK.
yeah. I mean, may or not be, but it's kind of that's the minor issue, isn't it? The
Yeah,
major issue
yeah. It
is
doesn't,
that
it
all.
doesn't, it doesn't change anything about the fact, but I think
Yeah,
you might be
it's
right
like
in that regard.
it's like I've said before. Yeah, I've had farmers say to me, "Come and see my farm. Come and see how well I treat the animals on my farm." And I've said, "No, I don't need to come see your farm. I'm quite happy, accept that you keep those animals in 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 decent conditions. That's for to me, that's not the problem. The fundamental problem for me is that those animals are exploited at all in the first place. That those animals are sent off for slaughter at all in the first place when we don't need to do it. That's not how you keep them. It's the fact that they are exploited in the first place and killed in the first place. That's the fundamental problem. That's
Yeah.
the fundamental problem. I don't need to go and look at a farm to know that that's what is going to happen to those animals, because that is what's going to happen to those animals on all animal farms.
Yeah, absolutely. It wouldn't matter if each one had a room in the Ritz at the end of the day.
No,
Wouldn't matter if cattle prods, sticks,
Joanna
all of these
Joanna
things
is
would.
asking Jim whether is that how you persuade women too? It's a little bit like that. That Michael Caine film where he talks about, well, you need to apply a little bit of pressure. He says it like that. Of course, I mean, as we know, when a woman says no, they don't really mean it, right? So when a cow tries to back up, they don't really mean it. You just have to apply a little bit of persuasion and pressure, don't you?
yeah, but at the end of the day, the answer to all these things is vegan outreach, vegan education, and it's the answer to all these things in two ways. First of all, in educating people, not to contribute to that. I mean, if everyone was to become vegan, then that would be the end of animal agriculture, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely. Martin's got a great question that's obviously going to change all our minds. Have you ever seen the natural death of a sheep versus a 4-second slaughter? You ever seen a woman that's in your family die of cancer over, I don't know,
but,
3.5 years versus a bullet to the head? Yeah, it sucks, but that doesn't mean we
yeah,
should go around shooting people. Like,
yeah, absolutely. But you see, the thing is that what you've got to remember about sheep is sheep aren't naturally from this country. Sheep are like from they would naturally live in fairly arid conditions in kind of the Near East. They're yet another animal that well, a long time ago, hundreds of years ago, were brought to this country and farmed, and they've been
But
selectively
that
bred.
wouldn't alter the argument about their death, though, would it, Ronnie?
Well, the point is they kind of they shouldn't be here in the first place. And I agree, and I agree with Andy. Yes, like a lot of humans, let's all, when humans reach a certain age, let's say a tiny fraction of their lifestyle. Now, I think if it was compared to say when sheep are killed in terms of their what would be their natural lifespan, like maybe like we kill kill every human when they're a teenager. What we do is when every human gets to be a teenager, we'll very, very kindly and humanely kill them so they don't feel anything. Because if we allow them to live any longer, then their death it's bound to be more painful than that. They may die of a disease, they may be in a road accident. So let's kill them all humanely when they're about.
Yeah, I've got a bit of arthritis in my knee, for example.
Well, you should. If you'd been humanely killed at
Yeah.
15, you would never have suffered the arthritis.
Somebody's not been looking after my welfare by killing me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it's the best thing we can do.
with a bolt gun to the head or whatever.
Dylan the villain,
Wait,
do you drink almond milk? Well, personally, I've got an intravenous drip. What about you guys?
I've got an almond farm.
Yeah. The thing about almond milk now, out of all the
actually, technically, if you've just said almond, you owe me 50p.
Yeah,
I'll send you my address.
Yeah, I think the thing about almond, although probably from an ecological point of view, it's the less, the least environmentally friendly of the plant milks. It still causes massively less harm to the planet than cow's milk.
It's weird, Ronnie, because apparently almond milk is very popular within the health food market, but very unpopular within the vegan community.
Funny that.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of don't. I don't like it because, my main use of milk is in my tea, and because almond milk has got quite a strong taste, I just think it makes the tea taste of almonds. So
I've actually noticed, though, I don't know about you guys, but I've noticed
the best
since we've had all this from the non-vegans about almonds, I've noticed a surge in vegans saying, well, I'm going to stop drinking it then, or I'm going to stop using them then, if that makes you happy. What are you going to do? Because that's the action of sin. I mean, it makes sense that it's not very popular within the vegan community because I've seen a lot of people that have dropped it just to the ethics of it.
Yeah, I think we could, even within products that are suitable for vegans, we should still try to make the most ethical choice. And almond milk isn't the most ethical choice out of all the plants. It's probably something like oat milk or hemp milk or something like that. It's probably, in terms of the environmental impact, they're probably the best ones to choose.
Yeah, I think it is hemp out of the most popular. I think potato is the most in terms of, milks, but in terms of popularity, I think it's hemp. Yeah, then oat.
Yeah, oat milk is very, very popular, I would say.
And to be fair, I think hemp could be even more efficient if we actually grew more hemp naturally, just in terms of like oxygen and things like that. But I mean, hemp is still a bit taboo, isn't it? So we've still got to overcome that stigma.
Another silly, childish, juvenile thing is that you can't have a conversation about hemp without people sniggering at you,
That's what I mean. It's still got that taboo, hasn't it? So, I mean, if we grew hemp in a vast abundance all over the world rather than sort of shunning it, I think that actually hemp milk and other products that contain hemp would be even more efficient than they are now.
Yeah, hemp is actually tremendous.
Yes, I mean, even if you take all the uses from the actual leaf and from the plant that we could make, just in terms of oxygenizing the world, in terms of, it's brilliant.
That's right, because Tim Barford knows a lot about hemp, doesn't he? Tim who does.
It's a brilliant plant that basically grows more or less anywhere. And
he's always stoned, old Tim.
Dozens and dozens of uses. Even if you didn't know how to make anything out of the actual plant, just having it growing around is brilliant for the planet.
Well, you can make all sorts of products from it. It's really versatile.
Yeah, hundreds.
Versatile stuff.
Not to mention cars.
Literally almost anything you can think of can be made out of it.
Yeah, you'd be swerving all over the place in a hemp car, wouldn't you? Because you'd be stoned.
No, they made a hemp car in the 1930s.
I was going to say, you can turn it into all sorts of different things.
It's on YouTube, and what they did, right, Ronnie, is that they attacked it with sledgehammers and didn't make a dent on it.
Well, yeah, there we are. I mean, it's an amazing product, and something that could be, and of course, if we didn't have animal farming, that would free up so much land.
Yeah.
And some of it could be devoted to hemp production.
Absolutely. I mean, hemp's probably a good example of what we're talking about, re this confirmation bias and this sort of prejudice and this kind of conditioning that's around people, that people just repeat this idea that, it's very close to cannabis. Well, even if it was identical, what's the problem to you? But still, it's been demonized for so long that all of the benefits that come from it are not worthwhile, or they're not even seen as benefits anymore. They're seen as detriments. We can't have that.
Whoa. I think somebody's saying, Ronnie, because of what you said about the sheep, that you're being racist because you're saying that if the sheep shouldn't be here, then neither should Asians. Jeez.
What?
It's a bit of a stretch. We'll have to go back in the chat to find.
Well, yeah, but you see, the sheep were brought here to be exploited and oppressed and killed. Hopefully that's not the reason why people from Asia are here. And of course, the other thing that we've got to remember in terms of ourselves as humans, we've come from, all of us have got ancestors that didn't originate here on these islands or wherever we are in the world. That there's been influxes of people all through time. People have gone to various places all over the world. So our ancestry comes from all over the place. And of course, the other thing is that everyone originally, so they say, everyone originally, all humans originally were dark skinned because we kind of came out of Africa and spread. And so I think humans started off dark skinned, and then the people that went to the colder regions, their skin became lighter over time to be able to kind of better cope with areas where there was less sunshine. So it's entirely different. Bringing an animal over from somewhere else to oppress and exploit that animal is entirely different than
Trying to say
people.
sheep
Yeah.
aren't natural to the UK. They've been here for thousands of
Yeah,
years.
no. The problem is that but the problem is they still suffer. They still
Yeah,
suffer.
I'm sorry, but that doesn't mean anything anyway. You could say that
And
lions are natural to Italy then because they were there thousands of years ago. It
yeah,
doesn't mean anything. They were still taken there from Africa.
the problem is it's that sheep were brought here to be exploited and oppressed and killed and used, right? That's the reason they're brought here. They weren't brought here for their own good, right? And the second thing is they still suffer from the fact that the conditions in this country are not what they evolved to be able to cope with, because the period of time that they've been over in this country is tiny in terms of evolution. And this is why you get problems with sheep. You get foot rot, and they get problems with their feet, because the lush pasture that they're on, the grass isn't natural for them. They didn't evolve to be able to handle that. I mean, I remember, and I remember specifically. I remember one time I was in Wales, or a holiday in Wales, and there was a massive storm during the night, loads of rain. And next day, we kind of went to visit. We actually went
In Wales, rain in
in
Wales.
rain in Wales. Isn't that incredible? You never normally get any rain in Wales. We went to visit like a kind of bird sanctuary the next day, and we were driving along, and there were loads of dead sheep in the fields because they just weren't able to cope with that condition of heavy rain. This is the conditions that they kind of that they live in aren't conditions that they've evolved to cope with, even though they have been here for hundreds of years. That's only like a blip in evolutionary terms, And then also they've been selectively bred to produce all that wool, haven't they? And have to be sheared, and then all the trauma that goes with that. And it's all none of it's for their own benefit. It's all to be exploited by humans and be oppressed by humans. And so it's totally wrong that they should have been brought here because they were brought here in order to oppress them. It's like the slaves. It's equivalent of the slaves being taken from Africa over to the USA to be used, to be enslaved and to be used as workers. That is where you need to. That's what you need to look at if you're wanting to find.
But are you saying they all ought to be returned to Africa then?
No, I'm not, and I'm not saying that sheep should be returned to the to where they where they evolved. I'm just saying that we need to end sheep farming, and then what would happen is that, of course, you'd have a huge reduction in the number of sheep if we ended sheep farming. But no, they couldn't be returned as they are anyway, because they've been naturally selected to produce all this wool and everything like that. That they
It's so ironic, isn't it, that they couldn't even return to their
they couldn't
homeland?
be returned to their homeland anyway, but we just need to stop farming them and stop oppressing them.
We're such terrible exploiters that we completely screw everything up, don't we? With our kind of just our exploitation on just about every kind of level of existence that you can think of.
Yeah, and we're such terrible exploiters that people don't even recognise that it is exploitation.
Yeah.
Don't even recognise.
Just to go back to this accusation of racism against Ronnie. So even if there was some weight to what you were saying, the key difference here would be that we recognise that bringing people over here simply for the reason to exploit them or to enslave them was wrong, and we abolished it some time ago. So using the same logic, how can you defend the oppression of another species if you're going to call Ronnie racist? Does that not make you exactly the same thing? Except the difference is we as human beings no different and no longer do that. Except you do that every single day as a job. How can you criticize someone for that when you're not recognizing what you're doing?
Well, exactly. I think it's a diversion, isn't it? People need. It's a diversion. I mean, there is no justification for animal farming whatsoever. We can all live perfectly well.
Now somebody's suggesting, Ronnie, that you've just said, I think they're talking to you, you've just said Africans should be returned. Well, you said
no,
that.
I haven't.
It was talking about sheep for a start, and then he actually said no. So that's not just an insinuation, that's just a flat out lie.
And also the sheep didn't come here. People that come over here from different countries, and that has been happening for hundreds and hundreds, well, thousands of years. People have migrated all over the globe. Right, those people, have done that of their own free will. They've not been forcibly brought to this country in order to be oppressed and exploited, which is exactly the situation that has happened with sheep. They've been brought here to be oppressed and exploited. So there is no comparison between that and people who voluntarily.
We need to set up a kind of Monty Python type table in a field and kind of line up all the sheep and say, "Are you a volunteer? Okay, well, this way. Were you brought here against your will? Okay, you go that way."
Animals naturally have migrated throughout the world as well. And that would be where it could be comparable to human migration. So there would be no suggestion that those animals that have naturally migrated, to different places should be repatriated to where they originally came from. And then that's really what you would need to compare.
A lot of global movement has been caused by human violence, for example. I mean, I think there's a lot of evidence, for example, that the reason that people live in inclement places for humans. I mean, we don't do well at the equator, and we don't do well at the poles. I mean, that's not ideal for human beings. And yet there's evidence that we were kind of driven there by warfare and, kind of exile and this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's the case. In order to find enough resources to live and to be able to live. I mean, the only reason why no one would, I think, live live in the extreme south or extreme north of the world, unless at one time they were forced to.
I think potentially it's the same for some of the existing tribes and things like that. Potentially that's the only place they were allowed to settle, and then they've never moved. Because no one chooses to live in the middle of a rainforest or any of these things. We're not adapted really for that. They've chosen to do that, and they've just stuck it out. But once upon a time, I would imagine that wasn't where they wanted to live. It's where they were forced to live for whatever reason. And they've just stuck there.
Yeah, I think it's important to probably remember, though, that at one time, almost the whole of the world was forest.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the base ecosystem. If you leave any land almost anywhere in the world, you just leave it alone, it reverts to forest. You see, so at one time, almost all humans were forest dwellers, if you go way back. So that's probably why, there are people in tropical forest and in the Amazon and all these places.
Well, maybe Kathleen Janaway was onto something, Ronnie, the idea of being in a wood-based economy,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think kind of what we need to aim for, because um, if we were to end animal agriculture, we would need only a fraction of the land we currently use in order to feed ourselves, and so all that land, used for animal farming, could go back to, you could go back to nature and could revert to forest, and that would be great in several ways. So first of all, it would be a tremendous help in terms of combating the climate crisis, because it would draw so much. The trees would draw so much carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and secondly, in terms of the survival and well-being of a huge number of animal species, they'd have far more natural territory in which to live and proliferate. So it would be, and that would be great. And I think also for humans, I think if we were able to live in a more wooded type of situation, it would be better for us as well. In terms of
There's a great conversation. Our next subject, lads, which is Brown
Insects.
Dog has said, and what about all the insects vegan farming destroys? So Graham's replied, "What's vegan farming for one thing?" But it's really quite a nuanced question, that one, because if there was vegan farming, the chances are that insects would not necessarily be impacted by them. Anything like the non-vegan farming, because we'll be looking at things like vertical farming. We'll be looking at other kind of ways of doing things, which is kind of already kind of happening in some kind of veganic
Well, yes,
system.
and also you get all these non-vegans that are suddenly concerned about insects, don't you?
Yeah,
The,
no, don't give a shit
you know,
about cows, but they care about insects. Yeah.
non-vegans become insect rights campaigners. But the thing is, if those people are really concerned about the number of insects that are killed by farming, the first thing they've got to do is adopt a vegan diet, because far fewer crops are actually grown to feed humans than they are to feed to feed vegans than they are grown to feed non-vegans. The
And
reason,
the weird
yeah,
movement question, of course, is that there is a genuine kind of doubt about the sentience of insects, even though that's obviously controversial within the movement. And then we've got the nuance of bees and honeybees, who are also insects. And so, there's this. I mean, that Garland farmer guy was kind of saying, "Look, you vegans, you got to decide: do you care about insects or not?" Right? And he was kind of suggesting that if you don't care, then it means honey is fine. If you do care, then what about all the crop deaths?
well, the thing, but the way to care about insects
Go vegan, yeah.
is to go vegan, because a huge amount of crops are grown to feed to farmed animals in order for people to eat those farm animals. And because it's so inefficient, that means that people who are non-vegan are actually responsible for more crops being grown than vegans are. So the non-vegans are more responsible for any insect deaths, the additional insect deaths.
Yeah,
That,
and also you got this thing that if we allow for the obvious, which is that any system is going to cause deaths or disruption or whatever you want to call it, it's the vegans who are the community who are most concerned about bringing that to a halt or to reducing it to the greatest extent possible. And so,
yeah,
if they care about insects, join the vegan community, because we're the,
yeah.
we're the only ones who care about that
We're,
kind of
we're
stuff.
the only ones that can, and if we are going to bring in methods of farming that absolutely minimise the number of insects and other animals that are killed through through farming, then the answer is to create a situation where we get a vegan administration as soon as possible, because we're the ones that are going to put that in place. And that means people going vegan themselves, doing their utmost to educate others to go vegan. So we get we get more vegans, we get more vegan politicians, we get more people to vote for them, and so we can be the ones that are in charge of deciding how farming's going to be, and
Oh, it'll be great to see the wording on the bill, though, wouldn't it, Ron? The kind of farming bracket insect protection bill.
well, yes, but I mean, it's not just insects. It's other obviously other animals as well that kind of, can be killed through farming methods. But yes, of course, because it's in line with the vegan ethic, isn't it? To kind of, seek to,
Yeah,
seek.
Brown Dog is saying pesticides are used on crops. Yeah, you're not quite getting the argument. What it is that of all the communities in the world, vegans will be the ones who are trying to find alternatives to that.
Well,
Yeah.
in fact, there's a farm, a veganic farm down in I think somewhere near Oxfordshire that way, which is highly successful. Where and it's kind of totally organic. Pesticides aren't used, and no animal products are used in the production of the food, and that would be something that could be spread everywhere. Those methods that it's Tolhurst Farm, and where people can find out more information about that is go to the website of an organisation called Vegan Organic Network. And if those methods used by the farmer there that are so successful, and indeed other farmers that use similar methods, could be spread everywhere, then we wouldn't need pesticides.
Mm-hmm.
He farms very successfully without pesticides. There's ways of doing it, and the only way that that is really going to proliferate is this if we vegans are in the position where we can help it to do so. And that fundamentally that means people going vegan and educating others to go vegan as well, if we're going to achieve that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just going back to the bee versus other insect thing for a moment. To be perfectly honest, I don't think it's a fair comparison to say if you care about bees, either honey's okay, so to speak, or you've got to care about crop deaths. I mean, those two things aren't comparable in the sense that no farmer is going, oh, we're just about to harvest this wheat field, go and grab like a bucket load of grasshoppers to chuck out first. Whereas we're literally breeding bees to exploit them, to make them to do a process so we can take honey from them. It's not an accidental collision, so to speak. I mean, obviously that does happen, but for the most part, what we're doing to bees is not comparable to how other insects or small animals are caught up. They're not comparable in the same way that's like saying if you care about insects, you can't drive your car because you'll hit them with the windscreen.
And at the end of the day, we don't need honey, do we? It's basically sugar,
Yeah.
isn't it?
So I don't think that's fair, personally.
Yeah. And folks, I've got to go now because I've got an early start.
That's fine. I'm probably only going to do a couple of minutes anyway, if there's only two of us.
So we'll speak soon. Take care then.
No worries. Thank you for joining, Ronnie.
See you, Ronnie.
Cheers, Roger. Cheers, Andy. Take care,
See you
everyone.
later.
Cheers, bye.
But I can't remember if it was Germany or I think it was either Germany or Belgium now. But I know that I was reading a couple of months ago when I was doing quite a lot of the research on the crop test stuff that quite a lot of farms over there. I can't remember the name of the plant now off the top of my head, but there was a weed that they'd been growing in all the outskirts of the fields, basically the perimeters and all the ditches. And this was a great, whatever it was, the weed flowered really well. And it basically attracted most of these bugs away from the field without them spraying any pesticides. It was almost like a natural way of removing them from where they were growing.
Yeah, it's kind of giving them something they want more than
And I mean, obviously, the more that we moved towards growing less to feed animals and we could rewild more, that would happen naturally too. The more natural wild space that these insects, small animals, and everyone else has got to feed and breed and live, the less likely they are to invade wherever it is that we are growing in. The fact is, we've invaded everywhere that they lived and started growing there, and then basically got pissed off that they've dared to survive. That's the issue.
Yeah, as usual.
Yeah, as usual. 16% of the planet's ice-free land is used for livestock grazing. Yeah, I can believe it. And there's huge parts of the world, obviously, that we don't live in. You know, we don't live on the top of mountains. We don't live where it's really cold. We don't live where it's really hot. We don't live in the middle of the desert. We don't live in the middle of the Amazon for the most part. We don't live in the middle of these places. We live on the outskirts of them. But there's loads of parts of America where people don't live because it's just you couldn't live there. It's too barren or whatever. In fact, there's parts of Australia, parts of Nepal, parts of Russia that have never, ever, ever been foot surveyed. They've only been surveyed by air because we can't get there. So there's so much of the planet that we can't even use, and yet that's still the percentage. That's pretty shocking.
Well, maybe we can give Tobias Lena a one-way ticket.
Yeah, there's some of those places in Russia we could just drop him off and just say, look, come back when you've surveyed every square inch.
Yeah. Yeah,
We found
here's
the
a notepad and a
perfect
pencil.
premises for you to launch Veganish.
Yeah. Oh,
To be
blimey.
fair, I was surprised earlier, when he said that, where he said he'd had quite a lot of flack for that Veganish thing. If I'd have saw that post, I'd have said, please set this up, make
No,
this yours.
I did a post welcoming it.
Yeah, I think that's the only way this could ever work. I said it a couple of
The
times.
thing is, Andy, what it is he loves to say that he's getting shit from the vegans all the time.
Yeah, which actually is it basically these phantom intersectionals again?
Yeah.
Right, okay, makes sense.
I mean, he did do a blog entry once called an activist called Roger Yates because I kept having a go at him, right? And so he kind of retaliated. He didn't like the fact that I called him a careerist and all this kind of stuff. But he loves the idea that he's so controversial within the vegan community that he gets flack from vegans. Well, yeah, because you want a type of veganism which is not veganism.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether that was intended earlier or
It's
what.
not hard to understand, is it? If you want a veganism which is not veganism, then you're going to get pushback.
Yeah, of course. You are from the people that understand it and are vegan. Yeah, this is what I don't understand. This is what I mean. It makes more sense now when he said at the end that guy came on and said, thanks for ProVeg for sponsoring the event. I mean, it makes sense why he's the speaker. But other than that, you could never understand why anyone would ever want him to come and speak at their event. Because he is. I mean, you could book him to speak at an event full of non-vegans, I suppose. But to speak at a vegan event makes no sense to me whatsoever.
That was the most insidious thing about it was when he teamed up with Melanie Joy and her husband. Well, he was already teamed up with the guy who became Melanie Joy's husband. But so Melanie Joy's husband ran the German Vegetarian Society, and he ran the Belgian Vegetarian Society, right? Yeah. So their essential position was kind of vegetarian, and they were government sponsored, and so they knew that they couldn't really talk about veganism, and so they always had a rather kind of anti-vegan position, but then they had the trouble of the fact that it was a time when all the conferences were being sponsored by vegans, and there wasn't any kind of vegetarian conferences. So they had to make it sound as though their position was kind of something to do with veganism, whereas they could have actually just said he could have called themselves the vegetarian tactician, which would have been more accurate. But where would he market that?
Yeah, true.
So he had to be called the vegan strategist, right?
Yeah. But I suppose even, as you say, even that name, that fits into that category. If that's what you're trying to achieve, to be controversial, then that ticks that box. Especially when you hear him speak and you realise that it's kind of the opposite of that. Yes, that's going to cause a reaction.
According to Wendy, I think Wendy suggested that he was the only speaker of the entire 3 days to use ableist language.
Yeah, I can believe that.
Yeah, I can as well. Because I do know that there was an autistic activist in Dublin, and they were on AR Zone when he was on AR Zone, and they begged him not to use certain language, and he just refused. So eventually, when he appeared in Dublin, this person said, "I want you to apologise," And I've still got it on tape, and he refused that as well. He just said, "No, I'm not going to." He's really arrogant and he didn't really give a shit,
Yeah, and you'd think though, for someone who is trying to dilute the philosophy to the point where it's kind of like everyone can do it, right? Nobody is excluded because all you've got to do is pretend to care. Then you'd
Well,
think,
he's not quite as bad as Reasonable Vegan, don't forget.
yeah, it's not. It's, no, I suppose it's not quite as diluted as that. But still, you'd think someone that's trying to appeal to all audiences, so to speak, would avoid using ableist language, especially if it was kind of made aware to them numerous times that this is causing a problem.
I think with people like that, it's almost a kind of anti-intersectional stance. It's almost like I can't be bothered to be.
Or do you think that he's kind of playing into that? The fact that I suppose a lot of non-vegans are ableist, probably without even realising it, and that's what is kind of like, again, meeting them halfway. I suppose the same that you probably, if you went into a pub on match day, you'd probably adjust the way you speak to fit
Yeah, but
in.
he
Is
wasn't
doing
in a
that?
pub in match day. He was in an academic.
I know,
company.
but I mean, from
Yeah.
his point of view, is that what he's trying to do? Is he being ableist on purpose when he calls like the vegans the crazies and that kind of thing? Is he trying to appeal to the people that genuinely think that?
I don't know. Yeah. I
Because
mean,
obviously there are a minority that do view vegans as the crazies or the hippies or the tree huggers or enter whatever
all I
slur
can
you
say,
want.
Andy, is that I'm not going to psychoanalyze Tobias Leonhardt for my mental health.
No, I don't blame you. Well, we could set you some homework. You could psychoanalyze
No,
Tobias and
no,
Reasonable
no,
Vegan
no,
and then
no.
compare the two.
Blah blah blah. No, no, no.
To be fair, I think I'd be delivering a straitjacket. I think that would be the end for most people to do that. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. Have we got anything big to tell anyone about going this week? What are your shows? What's your Ronnie show this week?
Yeah, Ronnie's coming up with this idea. It's a little bit of a play on words of VCO, like vegan camp out, but I think it's CVO. I think he said, why is CVO so important? So it's kind of like he's going to do the big reveal during the program, this kind of stuff. So it's almost
Well,
like
that'd be interesting.
yeah. And then I actually don't know about the time tunnel yet, because we had a big heavyweight session with Leslie Cross, and then we had a bit more of a light-hearted thing, with the battery train too.
Yeah.
So I'm actually kind of starting to run out of topics. Funny enough, I think we're up to about 20 shows now.
Yes.
I think the
Yeah.
original series was about 27.
Well, I suppose what do you class as too recent? Like, what would be the most recent that you'd be willing to do as a time tunnel?
Good question. I never thought of that really. I mean, I don't know. I mean, like, it would be interesting to. I mean, it would be kind of interesting to kind of engage that kind of, the kind of takeoff phase. Maybe the advent of the influencers would be an
Yeah.
interesting one.
Yeah.
And because I know it sounds very arrogant, but I can kind of see why they think that they kind of started, or at least kind of kickstarted the movement. That there was a kind of latent moribund thing which they only was vaguely aware of in the first place, and then they appeared, and then suddenly boom, right? And so what are they going to conclude? Well, it was obviously must have been down to us then.
Yes, yeah. Well, I mean, when I was narrating that Counterpoint article earlier, I noticed that Ingrid made a very similar point. And when I was researching for the film, I mean, I noticed that there was once upon a time like an anti-vivisection sector that kind of went quiet as abolitionist. And then when welfare started being talked about, it had a resurgence. But you could say exactly the same thing. I would imagine that all of those people that were anti-vivisection didn't just stop being anti-vivisection. They were just hushed up for a little while, or something else happened that took precedent or took the stage, and then all of a sudden a few more members or a few bigger names got involved, or someone with a bit of credibility, and they take the credit for it. And you can see why from their point of view they think, well, yeah, okay, I've done this, I've started this, or I've give this the kick up the arse that it needed, because from the outside that's exactly what it appears. You can understand sometimes when people say ridiculous things like veganism was started, 12 years ago by Gary Yourofsky, because their kind of search history before that was probably really, really slim.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting because one of the recent TikTok things that I put up was with Kim Stallwood. Now, Kim
I
Stallwood
saw,
went,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, he went vegan in 1976, and he said that he quite arrogantly, arrogant of youth, as it were, thought that, well, the movement started when I joined it. And I think there is an element of that. And I think, on a kind of, a cycle, that's probably what tends to happen. It's just that you tend then to kind of find out that that's not the case, which Kim did and everybody else has done. But I'm not sure that the latest crop have actually kind of figured it out yet, that there was a lot before them.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we talked about this a little bit off earlier as well, but I've noticed with a lot of people, a lot of them don't know the history and they don't realise that it's very easy for them to go and find these essays or to go and read this kind of stuff, and they just genuinely don't know. But there's a lot of them that are like, I don't need to read it. I don't need to care. Like, I know enough or whatever. It's about the now. The history doesn't matter.
Yeah, that was then, this is now, yeah.
Yeah, that there's a lot of that sort of attitude. It's irrelevant what they said.
But, there might be parts of life where we've got that attitude, well, that was then and this is now.
Yeah, I mean, and I obviously totally am all for the evolution of the idea, and that was always encouraged that veganism would kind of grow and encompass more things, so to speak. I just think that it should be evolution and not regression. And a lot of the times, what seems suggested is regression.
Yeah, well, obviously, I'd agree with that. And in terms of plans for the essays, you've been talking about bringing them into the 21st century, which sounds like a really interesting project. It's a question of how to do it. I mean, you're even thinking about you might actually do it live on air, as it were, yeah?
Yeah. I mean, the last thing that I would want anyone to think, because we always get accused of being this gatekeeper or divisive or troublemakers all the time, right? So I don't want anyone to think me and you know better. We're going to tell you how it is, and you've got to accept it. I'd much rather do it like, if a dozen or so people want to get involved and put their sort of thoughts across, and we'll reword it based on what everybody thinks as a sort of general consensus, because I do think that it's kind of,
you mean like an open mic type thing?
Yeah, that's you haven't necessarily got to join, but obviously we'll take a bit of extra time to wait for people to comment and all of that kind of stuff. And I think it's important that everyone gets to have their input and their say, as opposed to just the Ken being dictated to.
And what you would like do it one essay at a time?
Yeah. If everyone's happy with that, yeah. I mean, I think the surge and the story are the two most important ones, but I'm happy to do all of them if that's what everyone would want to do. Like, it's not, like I said, whatever I can do to encourage people to learn the history, to actually take the time to care and to make that connection so that they stick with this and realize how simple but serious that it actually is. Yeah, I'll give that every minute of my day.
Just put into reverse a little bit. You said the surge and the story, because the story, that's the one where he's talking to a vegetarian group, right?
Yes.
It's like a transcript, yeah. Because I've always thought of that as being the weakest of the essays, because
it is. That's why I wanted. It explains pretty much the gist of everything, though. In terms of the message, it is probably the weakest, but it does kind of summarize. I was only thinking of doing those two if we was only going to do two, say. But if we was potentially going to do all the essays, then it
see, a lot of intersectionals, they love that essay and they avoid the surge.
But that's why it's important that you kind of see how he and his thought process and even the definition in his own mind evolved through those essays. You can see his understanding of his own thing was literally evolving before his own eyes, and it's a decent period of time between the first one and the last one.
Yeah, but it's a bit disingenuous that people don't see the fact that he was talking to a meeting of vegetarians, and so that therefore he was bound to talk about the focus of veganism and not talk about the philosophical aspect of it too much.
Yeah, but it's very vague, but he still touches on pretty much everything in that essay too. Some of the language is flowery at best, but the story does sort of vaguely touch on the principles and everything else. So it's consistent. It's consistent the whole way through, and you can see how even his own values.
That would actually be a really interesting one to have a live about, because of the fact that it's kind of like it stands out because it's not quite as philosophical, and it doesn't kind of, because he basically starts off in 51, by the time he gets to 55, he's kind of got it all sussed out, hasn't he?
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, from our point of view now, that we don't really think about the fact that there's 4 years there. We just think, well, he wrote one essay and then wrote another essay. But yeah, in all that time, he was obviously doing his research, talking to people, having conversation, all of this kind of stuff, and he was shaping his view. But it is consistent from start to finish. You can just see how it grows.
I suppose 4 years doesn't sound much, but it is in the life of a social movement, really.
Yeah, you think, for example, like if you started working on, say, I don't know, like a paper or an essay today, that you wouldn't be finished until what, 2027?
Well, it's like doing a PhD, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's a decent amount of time. And the thing is, it's consistent throughout. Like I said, there is the evolution there, and there is the changing in his thinking. But at the same time, the thesis from start to finish is always consistent. All he does is kind of add and amend and make it stronger as he understands it better.
Yeah. It's like me. I mean, my PhD lasted 4 years because I'm not a kind of like genius level thinker. I'm one of the kind of people who do hard work. In fact, it's quite interesting. I learnt about the inner machinations of academia because my own PhD supervisor was the one that made sure that I didn't get a first. He said he argued that I should get a top 2-1, right? And the reason he said that is that he said, look, you're not. And he gave me a couple of names of fellow students. You're not like so and so because they're kind of genius level, but you don't get any work out of them. Whereas you kind of do the work, so you kind of do the slog, and that's why you actually are a kind of better student in the end, even though you don't get as high a mark. It's kind of a weird kind of way it works.
Yeah, but I suppose going back to the length of time between his essays and all that kind of stuff, it's been the same for me. I mean, I've been vegan coming up for 10 years this Christmas, but it's only really the last 3 or 4 really that I've actually looked into this stuff properly and understood it and everything else and made that connection. So my understanding of veganism has completely changed in just the last 3 or 4 years, let alone the last 10. If I'd have been writing a diary, say, or I was writing essays of my understanding of veganism, my first one to the one that I'd be writing tomorrow would be very, very different. There'd be the consistent theme of what I'm against, so to speak, but my understanding of that would change very much so. And you can see that in his work. That's what's frustrating. We're not talking about, people will read, right, 8 Harry Potter books or however flipping many books there are, or the Lord of the Rings series, which takes weeks and weeks and weeks of times. I'm not slagging those books off, by the way. I'm just saying people will find the time to read stuff. You can read every single one of these essays in an evening. In fact, you could listen to them in an hour and a half. I've done it for you. It's there. Like, so
well, that surprised me. Are you saying that the actual narration is only 90 minutes altogether?
I think so. I can't remember how. Hang on, I'll check while Sonny. I don't think it's that long. But yeah, I've got a video now that's got all of the essays in one video.
Oh, and Joanna, thank you for that comment.
I would agree. Where is my videos? I can't remember how long it is, but I know it's not ridiculously long.
I'd be surprised if you get them all in 90 minutes, though.
117 minutes, 47 seconds.
For all of them?
For all of them.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. Because the first one and the dust, they're not very long. It's only really the surge and the story which have got any length to them. And obviously, I don't speak particularly slow either, although I have tried to slow it down for the narration. I'm quite a fast speaker too. No, actually,
you don't say, Andy.
The case one really felt like, whilst I was getting to the end, it was like.
Have you got any theories about why he did it this way? When you've got the search part 1 and part 2, and he gets a big idea and he kind of condenses it down as though he's some kind of wizard or something with this kind of alchemy, and then so it all gets compressed like some scientific experiment down to 7 or 8 words, and then it expands again.
Yeah.
Do you kind of have you got any insights about why you reckon he
Well,
did
this
that?
is one thing actually. I meant to ask you this. So obviously, all these essays have been transcribed from the originals, right, for Candid Hominid or whoever did them. Um, but like for example, the story, is that an extract that's taken from the speech and there's more to it, or is that everything that was ever in existence? That was
I
like one of the
think they
questions I was
just
going to ask.
copy whatever's in the magazine.
Right, okay, okay. So potentially, for all we know, they took an excerpt of stuff
Yeah,
and he
it could
was
have done. Yeah,
summarizing. We
yeah,
don't know. It could have been like early editorial.
yeah.
That was what I was going to ask you. Yeah, if there were the original, potentially, if it was just copied exactly that way, or whether they had something else. But in that case, it could be the case that what was put in the vegan was already edited.
Yeah, but that's still not asking this question about why he kind of condensed everything and then spread it back out again.
Well, I suppose it's to do with the audience that he was speaking to.
I think
But
it was. I
also,
mean,
I
the way,
suppose also we have to take into consideration what we was talking about earlier. If this was in issue whatever, then there's X amount of time between that issue and the next one where there have been correspondence.
yeah. Well, I think it's. I think it's the fact that obviously they were dealing with the fact that they're doing the machinations of a social movement and also thinking philosophically about an idea all at the same time, and so they had to go through a kind of process about. I mean, at the same time they were like going through a process of formalization of the society itself,
Yeah.
like a constitution and voting and all that, and even deciding on things about, how we would run the membership type idea and all this. I mean, one of the essays gets very close to Reasonable Vegan, where he's basically saying, if you seek to be and you understand the idea, then you are type thing, right?
Yeah.
And so that's an interesting one.
Yeah, but I suppose I can't remember if there's two essays in between. I can't remember off the top of my head which one's which now. But then again, a bit later on, it goes on to basically say, well, we if it's the latter, then you're not part. You're not part. Like but it is a kind of all or nothing thing. You're just going to be on the fringes. You couldn't be a member, so to
Well,
speak.
yeah, because I think at that point, although I'm not totally sure about this, but I think at that point Watson jumped in and he made this kind of comment about, look, we can't have kind of people who are vegan between meals.
Yes, that's it. There, that's the part I was looking for. Yeah. It's around all around that same sort of, and it's absolutely right. And I mean that's another key point that a lot of these people, when they'll go back and they'll cherry pick a line from Cross or whatever, or I've seen people that literally just dismiss either back or whatever. They'll go, yeah, they're wrong. Do you not think all these people, they were communicating with each other, they were having meetings and all this kind of stuff? Do you not think that one of them might have said, "Oh, I don't agree with your views here"?
It was all done by pigeon post.
Because like the stuff that we're talking about now, right, like the famous either back quote that people disagree with and argue with, the reason that we've got that quote now is because it stood the test of time. That's the reason that we have that quote now. If that was something that everyone else in the movement disagreed with and wasn't agreeing, we wouldn't know that quote existed. It wouldn't be a quote. It would just be a conversation like all other conversations that aren't memorable enough to be kept.
Well, funny enough, it's in a little kind of pamphlet called Why Veganism, 64 it was. But I think that kind of line is about the only one that's any good, I think, if I remember.
Yeah. Yeah, I've read the pamphlet. I think there's a lot of flowery language, to be fair, when you look back. There just is. But you've also got to understand the sign of the times too. A lot of the stuff that we know full well about now, they probably had absolutely no idea about. They only knew what was in front of them.
No, I mean, in that sense, I mean, it's interesting the amount of times that they kind of allude to the idea of rights. And of course, there's nothing much about it, and certainly nothing in a kind of Tom Reagan sense at all. So,
well, I'm glad you mentioned that because that brought us full circle to where I meant to go earlier, whilst Kev and Ronnie were still on here. But if we pushed veganism to the side a moment, and you go back to the intersectionality conversation, even when you just talk about animal rights and you say, quote Reagan, where these the animal rights movement is not opposed to the human rights movement, or even that longer sentence from the 1985 essay, people don't care about that. So it's like, well, who are you getting your view or your idea of animal rights from if you're not even willing to listen to this?
Well, somebody in color rather than black and white. Obviously, it's got to be something to do with what they know in terms of I mean, like it's all to do with the original goat and all this kind of malarkey nowadays, right? And so,
Well, yeah, and I mean, I understand that because I understand some people will go, well, what Donald Watson said, or what Eva Bat said, or even what Leslie Cross said. We're talking a long, 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 long time ago now. But what Reagan said's not that long ago, in anywhere
no,
near
but
as
the
embarrassing.
point is, as we know with Reagan, his language is very kind of tight and philosophical, whereas the language of the pioneers of the Vegan Society was anything but polemic. And so this is why if you compare, say, Singer and Reagan, Singer's book is way superior to Reagan's in a social movement sense
Yeah,
because it's got pictures in it,
yeah.
it's got descriptions of animal use, it gets people all stirred up and all the rest of it and all that. And Reagan didn't do any of that. Right. He just basically said, well, look, I'm going to lay down the kind of concrete for the foundation of the animal rights movement.
Yeah.
And some of it might be difficult. You see, Singer, you could say, had the sense not to do that and just say, oh, me and Ingrid, we think this is cruel, So,
Yeah, I mean, I suppose looking at it that way, you could describe Reagan's is the book and Singer's is the movie, where it's got all the brilliant effects and all that sort of stuff, but it's a very watered down version of the actual story.
Yeah, and then obviously you've got the fact that it was 8 years before, so that's a massive advantage. It's like Star Wars coming out 8 years before whatever was 8 years after Star Wars. So it's got that advantage of being the first.
Yeah, of course, yeah. But yeah, I suppose I did notice when I was narrating the counterpoint argument, you can definitely tell some of the bits that Reagan wrote versus some of the bits that Francione wrote just by the subtle differences in their language.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, if you have a reread of it again, reread it with those thoughts in mind, and you'll definitely notice. You'll notice the Reagan bits first, and it helps you find which of the Francione. But yeah, you can tell. Not all of it, but certain sentences or certain lines or certain little sections where you're like, that's definitely Reagan there.
Yeah, I was asking Seb Alex after the conference. I said, I did notice that you didn't mention Reagan, and he said he didn't have time to do it. And we ended up kind of talking about whether he would have dropped the subject of a life concept in favor of sentiency if he'd have kept with Francione, because he was, I mean, even right back in 83, in fact, he kind of said right at the end, I mean, I think it's page 400 and something, right, some of the last pages of the case, he said, although I've limited subject of life to these individuals, the chances are it's going to cover all these, including birds and fishes and all this kind of stuff. And so, but he needed to wait right to the end before he was able to say that, because he had to do it in a very conservative way. And I think it's very hard for us to probably imagine what the philosophical kind of ambience was in the 1980s. Even with the fact that you had Singer. And the chances are that, from Singer was just probably getting loads of shit and flack and everything at the time, because he was kind of like there on his own. And that in itself would have probably meant that Reagan would feel very supportive and want to say supportive things, even though he actually hated Singer's philosophy.
Yeah, it's true. But it was also a testament to who Reagan was as a person too.
I know, yeah. But I think there would have been kind of did it a little bit in return, I suppose.
Yeah, I was about to say there would have been like academic respect from Singer in return.
Yeah,
but I think it would have been from the same position as Reagan's was.
Yeah, and with the substantive text from Francione, you even got that as well. So if you go back to Rainbow Without Thunder, in particular, Animals, Property and the Law from 1995, it's very kind of academic. It's kind of legalese. It's got the legal way of referencing and everything, and so whenever he was doing whenever he was doing the academic thing, he was always much more kind of reasonable than if he was kind of in front of a group of vegans, which is why that, the last 10 years is a good
Yeah, I really like that talk, to be honest.
yeah.
One of my more favourite ones, yeah.
I mean, it'd be interesting for him to do another one.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things. He hasn't responded actually, but I sent him a fairly long email after his talk in the sentient rights thing, saying it would be that talk especially would be one of the best things that you could update because it kind of covers everything. And obviously, I mean, it's a good few years old now. Just doing an updated version of that would basically, you could split that into small videos for
Yeah,
TikTok.
there's a problem there though, because Francione does try to go back to the very same arguments
Yeah,
rather than updating his arguments, which is a shame. Because when he talks about the fur campaigns, for example, he's
yeah, the
really
leather
kind of
shoes and stuff.
stuck in the 1980s.
Yeah.
It's a real kind of shame, really.
But at the same time, what I was potentially thinking was if he did something like that, I would split it into parts. So if I can cut stuff like that out. So like, but yeah, I think that would be one of the things that he should potentially update. Because
He's almost doing a replica now of what Reagan did.
that's what I was about to say to you. Yeah, although I hadn't heard exactly the one he did on the sentience right thing. It's just a
but Reagan
variation
was
of
just treading water for the last few years, wasn't he?
yeah. And I mean to be fair, you could potentially say that Gary's kind of doing the same thing.
Yeah,
and I
you
suppose
could,
lots
yeah.
of people do once they get to a certain point. They just
I suppose you do, yeah.
look at the Yarovsky speech, the famous Yarovsky speech. I mean, that literally was recited word for word about 100 plus times.
More than that, more than that.
Well, yeah,
200,
more than exactly,
yeah.
exactly. So yeah, I suppose if you've got something that you think works and there's not a lot of opposition to it, and there's actually the opposite, you are going to keep.
That's the
saying it.
ironic thing about academia, that when you become a professor, then you give all these lectures and you know them word for word. You've said them over and over and over again, and you're getting more pay for doing something which is for you a lot easier.
Yes, yeah. Well, the thing is as well, I suppose, with every time that you say it, obviously, yeah, you get better at saying it and all that kind of stuff, and you make less mistakes. But at the same time, you lose all that passion too. And you can kind of see that in some of Reagan's later speeches where he's just still doing the same thing, and it's so much more casual than it was at the beginning. There just isn't that same fire there because how can you have the same passion about the same thing, repeating it over and over and over and over again?
Well, yeah, but I mean, see, what it is then is it's like becoming a stand-up comedian. What you can do is you can start playing with it.
Yeah,
In fact, Aspie said that to me. He said he's got about 4 core speeches. This is 2015, and he said he's completely bored of them now. And he said, but the point is, I can kind of do them backwards if I need to.
Yeah. And I suppose you can mix and match a little bit. You can take a bit from one and a bit from another and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and then you get to know which ones work and which jokes work and the timing and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you do that lecturing, even if you've only done one lecture, say 3 or 4 times. By the time you've done it the 4th time, it's a hell of a lot better than the first.
Yeah.
And when you consider that Yarovsky did his thing more than 200 times, it was literally like Eddie Izzard, on stage.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose, as you say, it's not just the information that he's getting more and more accustomed to saying and everything else, but as you say, even the little jokes or the little anecdotes and stuff.
It's everything. It's the way you
learn what works,
around
what
the
doesn't,
stage,
and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, what's going to trigger an instant response? What's going to get the questions you want?
That's right.
Yeah.
Because I mean, essentially, you're in charge of the entire room by then. Joanna says, Roger, can't you invite Gary Francione to your show? Well, couldn't do that for the Right show, but could be interesting to have him on as for a time tunnel.
Well, in the email that he hasn't responded to, so I can't answer. I asked him if he'd be interested in doing a sort of nostalgic show talking about activism and the changes and that sort of thing with you and Ronnie, and I would potentially host it and just sit back and let you speak. But like I said, he hasn't responded. But I think again, encouraging all that kind of stuff.
There is a very early podcast about violence between me, Gary, and Ronnie.
Yeah, that's really good. But I enjoyed just it was about 4 or 5 minutes before the actual his talk on Zoom spoke, and then a little bit when both you and Ronnie asked your questions. But there was just that nice sort of nostalgic feeling that you've obviously all got that different levels of experience and all that sort of different years and all that kind of stuff, but it all amalgamates together. It's nice. It's, you know, people enjoy listening to that kind of thing, and also it shows the changes and the transitions and everything else. So yeah, I mean, I think stuff like that is definitely worthwhile doing, but until he responds, not
Yeah,
much.
John is saying it's cool that you've asked him. So
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I will potentially leave it another week because I know he was in the process of coming to England for a little while, so I'm not going to harass him. But if he haven't heard by say another week, I'll sort of send him another one.
yeah, he'll be busy going around all the supermarkets asking for empty boxes, and I don't think.
Yeah, but I'm not sure how long he said he was coming over for, but I know he's here.
I think it's 2 years. I think.
Yeah, 2 years. I know. I was going to say, I know it was a fair old while. Personally, I don't think he'll end up going back to America. To be fair, I think Anna wanted to come back to.
I was just about to say that because obviously Anna is British, isn't she? So.
Yeah, I think that, and plus, obviously, you know, no disrespect intended at all, but they're both getting older as well. That it's going to cost them a lot of time and money to get the dogs to come over.
Yeah, but also, you know, it might. You just kind of get a feeling that it might be great to get away from the land of Trump, you know?
Yeah, and to be fair, I was about to say as well, it might well do Reagan they might do Gary the world of good as well to set up in kind of a new town where he can kind of do whatever he likes and start himself over, so to speak. You know, it'd be good if he does start having a presence again.
Yeah, well, I mean that is a conversation, that one, because. I don't know how he'd fit in really because I mean the first thing you would do is just call everybody else a welfarist. So
yeah, well the thing is he's not wrong.
Well, I know, but
there's got to be a
it's
solution.
not too helpful even if he's right.
There's got to be a solution of it rather than just going around calling everyone a welfarist. Yeah.
It's like going around calling everybody an animal abuser, isn't it, Andy?
Yeah, it doesn't solve the problem. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I totally agree, but that's part of the thing. I mean, yeah, it is all about education, but at the same time, he's a source of that, and you know that needs to continue too.
So this has been another concise 2.5 hour show.
I know. I thought we wouldn't go at all after Ronnie left, and we've done nearly an hour, so might as well just go to 10:30 and call it an evening.
Yeah. Well, if you can think of something to say for 8 minutes, go ahead.
8 minutes for 8 minutes. Yeah, but yeah, going back to what we was talking
8
about.
minutes starting now.
With the essays and stuff, I obviously there's not that many people in here, but I'd be more than happy to do like one a week, one a fortnight, however anyone sort of wants to look at it. And I think it's quite important. We haven't got to make huge changes anywhere because the vast majority of it's fine. It's just subtle changes to the language, the its and things and that kind of stuff that potentially needs updating. But
yeah, well, the point is, of course, is that we would talk about the language being used, but we'd also be talking about the ideas being expressed.
That's it. It's a great opportunity to get people because I mean I'd read those essays.
It'll be an incredibly kind of educational event, actually.
Yeah, that's because sometimes I've read those essays, I don't know, half a dozen times at least, and obviously I reread them all again just before the documentary and during the documentary for the slides and all that sort of stuff. But it's only when you're narrating them that you're really taking it in. It's kind of totally different.
I was gonna ask you that because it used to be said when I was a kid that the real way to learn something would be to hear it, to write it down, and to say it. I think it was.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like I'd thought about this a couple of times, and I've even spoken about this in the past. But that little particular section where it's like man will never know freedom, whilst other beings are not free, so to speak. When I was actually reading that out, that really hit home. Like, you know, yeah, this is inclusive. This is literally like you can't get away from this. So yeah, I definitely would agree with that it doesn't matter how many times I'd actually read them on my screen, reading them out when I was narrating them gave it a whole new sort of level that I hadn't experienced.
Yeah, I mean, the cliche is that it brings them to life, doesn't it?
So
yeah, Graham,
I would definitely say that.
Graham and Georgie, so we'll probably see you tomorrow, I think, at the Westmoreland Street. So take care, have a good night. Right, yeah. You still got 6 minutes.
Yeah, we ain't gonna fill 6 minutes. That's pretty much. So yeah, I mean, but for whenever, if it's,
I can always read your book out if you want.
if there's interest in doing that, then yeah, I don't know when's best. Whether it's best to do it on YouTube or whether I suppose it is YouTube because we need the slides, don't we?
Yeah, but we can stream it to both our channels. But also, yes. I think for the first one, we need to give it a real good few few
Give it a
days of
proper, give it a
free
proper
advertising.
promotion, yeah, and explain what we're doing.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah,
what
yeah.
it's all about. Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll have a chat about that off air at some point, and we'll organise that for one of the days. But yeah, like I said, I'm more than happy to do all of that kind of stuff. Same with the narrations. If anyone's got a suggestion, I'm not even going to try and do a book, not because of the time involved, but because of the copyright issue. I think anything that's essay length is okay. But I think,
Graham, don't do it. He said I had my head in the oven.
oh no, don't do that.
Mm.
Well,
It
it's not
doesn't
that
it
bad.
doesn't
It'll
even
get
work.
better.
It doesn't even work nowadays, is it? Putting your head in the oven.
No, not the electric one. It's all right. Tobias is finished, but no, the electric ones are not so good for that.
Yeah, yeah, he's long gone. Yeah, he's probably back in his coffin with
Yeah, till the next time someone wheels him out for a talk.
the Gollum of the Reducitarian movement.
Yeah, but then again, that goes back into the whole, although we didn't do all 10, that 10 things speech, he's obviously really proud of that because it was basically the same speech today.
No, I think he did all of them in the end.
Oh, did he do them all?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, I missed
because
that.
I said in the comments that, well, if he's only going to do 8, he won't do this.
Yeah. It's gonna. Oh well, I missed about the first, I don't know, 5 or 6
Yeah,
minutes.
because he was really rushing though, wasn't he? He was.
Yeah, he was rushing.
Yeah.
And twice, actually, I knew when Symbiosis was coming, but I thought he was going to bring it in earlier because he started laying the grounds.
Yeah.
But then I think he got distracted. Yeah. But it's very sad that you can kind of predict what he's going to say. Like he hasn't adjusted at all, and he's still being booked to do things, repeating that speech. Like, why would anyone who potentially, because I mean, it's freely available on YouTube. Why would anyone who's vegan who listened to that want to book him to speak to vegans? It just seems, I don't know, just completely nonsensical to me. I mean, that would seem crazy. Especially, but then again, I suppose if he is basically paying for himself to speak, you can see why.
There's loads of chat about garlic going on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, garlic head sounds tasty, does it? I don't think we need to go there.
Certainly not. I can't. I mean, it
3 minutes.
doesn't sound great. It doesn't sound all that productive. In fairness, it sounds bad breath all over. I don't think that I can do another 3 minutes. I don't even think I can shit talk
What was the last thing you posted?
on TikTok.
No, on YouTube.
The last thing I posted on YouTube was the counterpoint narration from.
Oh, you did do that, and did you
Yeah,
do the Ingrid? Did you do the Ingrid one as well?
Yeah, I did the Ingrid bit as well. Yeah.
Ooh, just like chess, eh?
Actually, again, to sort of go back to the you don't realise
You'll be careful if you're going to say she sounded great.
I'm not going to say she sounded great. No, I can't lie. She sounds okay for Ingrid, is what I'm going to say. It's not that bad. Some of the things she says are like, all right. But again, I'd probably only ever read that with like, it's Ingrid before. So it wasn't until I read it out that I thought, well, yeah, okay.
Well, I mean, to be honest, Ingrid Newkirk is very good at what she does, which is to grow a brand, really, essentially, And so, but I mean, in terms of being consistently, in terms of philosophy, that's not an interest to her. In terms of keeping feminists on board, that's not an interest. To her, in terms of not fat shaming or using ableist terms, these things are just not an interest to her. She's very much in the same mindset as the anti-intersectionals, to be honest.
Yes, yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah. But yeah, I managed to finish it off, and her bit's only very short, really, in comparison. So there wasn't a lot that she could get wrong, to be perfectly honest. But yeah, I've chucked that one up. Like I said, I'm more than happy to do anything like that sort of length, to be honest. They're fairly easy. It takes, almost as long to do the video to line up the words with what I'm saying.
You could do the Bridget Brophy thing from 65.
Yeah, that would actually be quite a good one. I think I've still got that as a PDF from when you sent it over before. There's 2 of those, though, isn't there? Is there 2 different ones?
I don't think so. There shouldn't be, anyway.
No, is there 2 different Bridget Brophy things, though? And the one of them is from that book.
Well, there's one that reproduced in the book, but the actual thing was from the the newspaper. I think was it the Times?
Yeah. I'd rather do the original, the full thing. Yeah.
But I think the one in the book is is just a copy, I think, but I'm not
Oh,
sure.
okay. I think I might have it twice then and didn't realise that they weren't the same thing. But yeah, I can potentially do that one. Anything like that,
Here,
to be honest.
Ingrid said she's leaving a piece of her neck to King Charles in her
Yeah,
will.
I did read something, but I didn't actually read the story. I just saw the headline and Ingrid's face and just thought, oh, yeah, okay, great.
Well, you see, that's part of the fact that Peter have always regarded themselves, and this is their term, not mine, they regard themselves as media whores. And that, so kind of it's almost like that thing, there's no such thing as bad publicity, which kind of sociologically and in terms of media sociology and in terms of social movement theory is not true.
Yeah.
But, a lot of people do kind of think, well, you get yourself in the papers, and then get yourself on the Piers Morgan show. See, that's the problem, you see. I mean, like, I was thinking about the Piers Morgan thing today. The only people who've been on that are the people who don't do the kind of serious, deep stuff. It's the people who do the controversial stuff. And so the likes of Piers Morgan and all the research staff associated with that show will have a really kind of, superficial version of veganism and animal rights in their head.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like their fault and yet not their fault as well.
And I mean, obviously, I suppose from the show's perspective as well, like there'll be a process of like, is this person likely to kick off? Yeah, cool, have them on the show, because they want, they don't want them to be too fiery that Piers might look silly, but they want them to be fiery enough that Piers can put them in their place.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, when you think about it, if you go back to some of the, Reagan probably wouldn't have done that great on something like the Piers Morgan show.
No, I was about to say I don't think he'd get. I think the problem is, although he wouldn't lose his temper, he wouldn't get an opportunity to speak.
Well, it's just that if he was just sat there thinking about the question, I mean, that's almost like a taboo. There's a taboo against that. Oh, I've asked you a question, but don't think about it.
Piers would slag him off or something. He'd say something absolutely ridiculous, and Reagan would go, "Thank you so much for the question. I really appreciate you taking the time to ask." Yeah, it just wouldn't work. The dynamic wouldn't work. He'd never get on the show for exactly that reason.
Yeah, I mean, it's a ludicrous situation where somebody asks you a question. If you actually think about the question that somebody just asked you, that seems a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, when you actually think about that, I don't know whether that was Reagan's polite demeanor or whether that was actually a genius buy-in time technique where every time that he would respond to a question, if you say, "Thank you very much for the question."
No, I think that was just a product of him being.
It makes sense, to be fair, because he would normally show you when he was thinking. Like, he wouldn't hide it. He would say, he'd sit there with his hands clasped or something, and
and like we have that thing with the Late Late Show where the audience was starting to get a bit impatient with him.
Yeah, because he wasn't controversial, right? It'd be like he wasn't getting wound up. He wasn't given the reaction they expected. Even a couple of them say that, don't they? The one guy, Mr. Pinchy, challenges him.
You're not what I expected.
Yeah. Because they expected him to come on and argue with them.
And then they try to twist that by going, "Oh, you've given us a sugar-coated version," right? And all that kind of crap.
Yeah.
I mean, it's human beings are so terrible when it comes to talking to each other, because one of the things that we say sets us apart from other animals is our conversational skill and all that, and yet we're actually pretty shite at it. And not only that, we're very deceitful when we do it.
Yeah, I know. But I suppose, do people even realise half the time that they're being deceitful? Or is it just the fact that they've been deceived?
It's all just kind of, each generation has to play a particular game, don't they?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that when we were on the media in the 80s, Ronnie and myself, I don't think we had to have the kind of Joey Cobb strong kind of scattergun. When somebody's saying something, you can see behind Joey's eyes that he's kind of going, "Oh, that's answer number 3, 4, 5."
Yeah. I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas I don't think we did it that way. We were kind of, "Oh, okay, that's interesting," that kind of thing.
Yeah, but I mean, thinking back to say like the 80s and that sort of stuff, what was there that kind of look at me kind of one person doing more than others or getting more attention than others the way there are now? I mean, just for example, just to stick on the Joey line, like, you know, he's going to turn up to that protest. I don't know if it's this Tuesday or next Tuesday, the final vigil outside Pilgrims, and they'll get 20 or 30 more people that will show up just because of that. Did that
Oh
used to
right,
happen?
I didn't know about that. Yeah.
Because I mean, was that something that used to happen in like the 70s and the 80s as well? That there'd be like one particular activist that could bring all these people that would never come again, or was it literally they were there for the cause?
Well, there were some kind of well-known ones, perhaps, in the sense that, Robin Smith from, like the Now clip where you've got the guy
Yeah,
going,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, well, he was kind of like the leader of the Now, if you like. So there were some names, but it certainly wasn't anything like the influencers type stuff. And part of that is that I don't think anybody ever thought of it in that way.
yeah. And I suppose the other part of it was that attention was probably just attention, right? It wasn't financial, it wasn't economical attention, it wasn't buying the merchandise and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, but there's also there was a tranche of people who actually went out of their way to be anonymous. So Ronnie was one of those,
Yeah, yeah.
and until he couldn't be right, and then I
Yeah,
was
yeah,
one of
but well, I
those.
suppose besides Ronnie, everyone in the Animals film is covered up, aren't they, completely? So yeah, they're all
Yeah, yeah,
anonymous.
and so a lot of people were kind of like going, "Oh, well, I'm not," I mean, it's a little bit like in the present day when people keep changing their names and stuff and that kind of stuff. But I mean, like people used to just wear masks or whatever and use a false name and this kind of stuff. And a lot of us had multiple ones. I mean, I must have had about 12 names, I think.
Oh, what was before we end? Because I mean, we've gone on and on and on. But what was your most used false name then? What was your alias?
Well, we had John Hughes was used in an interesting way that got me into a fraud trial in the end. But I did a lot of work as Jill Lockwood, and I did a lot of work as Sarah Dean, because my partner at the time wanted Sarah Bean, and I said, no, it's too close to soya bean. So we had this conversation
Well,
about the
although
name.
ironically, that would probably work really well these days as an
I
actress.
know, yeah. I know.
Right. Well, it's been a pleasure as always. Thank you so much. If you want to listen to more Roger, then Tuesday's your next bet, 7 o'clock on his YouTube channel with Ronnie. Got nothing else scheduled before then. If we do arrange something in regards to the essays, obviously we'll give everyone due notice and put it out a good few days before.
Might be a good idea to think about next Friday for that, I think.
Yeah. That suits me fine.
Yeah.
Gives us plenty of time to get it together and to put it out there as well and get it
Put
shared.
it out there and do a bit of due diligence in
Yeah.
terms of.
What you want to go? What, 8 o'clock?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, yeah, brilliant. Okay, so for anyone listening, we'll potentially go for next Friday at 8. If you'd like to participate.
What
in
we
that
need to
one.
do is in the description is explain what the hell we're doing.
Yeah,
That's
what we actually want to do.
Yes.
Yeah, and what we'll do is we'll provide a link as well, so people can start reading beforehand if they want to.
Yeah. We'll have one of those things where we've got loads of people on screen and they read one word at a time. That kind of like in that kind of parlor game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Right, thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Speak to you soon, and if not, I'll see you next week, the same time, 8 o'clock. See you later.
Bye, everyone. Take care.
Bye bye.